Chapter 845. After leaving the Medicine King Valley, I didn't go straight to Wangu Grotto Heaven. Instead, I decided to go back to the Fire God Temple. What I had told Fatty wasn't a lie. There were only a few days left until the half-year deadline, so I had to go see Bayan first before going to Wangu Grotto Heaven to cultivate. After learning about Bayan's true identity from Nangong, there were still many things he didn't want to tell me. Perhaps I could get some information from Bayan during this trip to the Fire God Temple. After leaving the Medicine King Mountain, I went straight to the airport. I had nothing to do on the plane, so I just lay there, familiarizing myself with the transformation of Taoist Qi into form, and thinking about what Uncle Lin had told me. Nangong, Bayan, Uncle Lin, and all of them had been giving me all sorts of information and guiding me along the way. They had been my guides ever since I'd stepped onto the path of cultivation. Therefore, Uncle Lin's serious warning wasn't just because he was worried. It was more likely that he knew something was about to happen, but couldn't say it out loud. He could only use this method to warn me. Therefore, I didn't dare to neglect Uncle Lin's words. That was also why I didn't hesitate to agree. Thinking about this, I sighed inwardly. In fact, there was no need for Uncle Lin to tell me all this. I'd already felt a strong sense of crisis. Over the years of cultivation, I hadn't just increased my cultivation base, but also my knowledge. I'd long since learned a lot about the cultivation world. But recently, a lot of things have happened that have completely exceeded my understanding. Ignoring everything else, just the appearance of the 10 great divine items was something the cultivation world hadn't seen in thousands of years. All of this was to prepare for the opening of the Mountain and Sea Realm Gate. Just the process of preparing for the Mountain and Sea Realm was shocking enough. Once the gate of the Mountain and Sea Realm opens, I can't help but wonder what sort of shocking events will unfold. In the face of such a huge change, others might be able to escape and hide temporarily to avoid trouble, but I can't hide at all. Therefore, Uncle Lin's words are very reasonable. In the face of these things, the only person I can rely on is myself. Only by increasing my cultivation will I be able to protect myself in such a situation. Of course, I didn't just need to protect myself. There was also Bayan, the Fatty, Nangong, the Witch Tribe, Wangu Grotto Heaven, and so on. There were countless people and things I couldn't let go of. Therefore, this requires me to have greater strength. While thinking about these things, the plane landed and arrived at Shenangjia. I was already familiar with the road from Shenangjia to the Fire God Temple. Not long after, I arrived in front of the Fire God Temple. It was just that, unlike the joy and anticipation I felt in the past, this time, I felt a little apprehensive. Previously at the Medicine King Valley, I already knew that Tao Wu was killed by Monster Godling, and I was the reincarnation of Monster Godling. To a certain extent, I was Monster Godling. After knowing this, I felt a bit of guilt. I didn't know how to face him. I stood in front of the Fire God Temple and hesitated for a long time. Finally, I sighed and walked in. I am the reincarnation of the demon god Feng, but ultimately, I am not the real demon god Feng. I am Zhou Yi, the husband of Swan and I. Moreover, Lao Ai had long known about my background and had never expressed any dissatisfaction, so she didn't mind. It seemed that there was no need for me to take it to heart. After entering the Fire God Temple, I still didn't find any signs of the contract, but I didn't mind it. He's been around for thousands of years, and naturally he has his own goals. Now that the Mountain and Sea Realm is about to open, he should be just like me, busy accumulating his resources. Therefore, there's no need for him to come see me. As I walked, I quickly arrived at the inner room where Bayan and I were staying. There were still a few days before we would meet, so Bayan was naturally not here. I was not in a hurry and just sat cross-legged on the bed, continuing to cultivate the transformation of Dao Qi while waiting for Bayan to appear. Just like that, a night passed. On the morning of the second day, a strange noise came from Xiang Lu's pouch. I took out the sound-transmitting talisman. It was Han Wennan. Han Wennan. He should still be accompanying Yi Pianpian in the Peng Lai deity region. Why would he send a message now? Did something happen to Yi Pianpian? Filled with doubts, I quickly opened the sound-transmitting talisman and found that there were only a few words in the message. Han Wennan only said that he was looking for me and asked where I was. He didn't say anything specific. Han Wennan had always been a reliable person. If there wasn't anything urgent, he wouldn't easily send me a message. Also, I remembered that sound-transmitting talismans couldn't be used in the Peng Lai deity region, so he must have come out from there. I had originally planned to ask Han Wennan about the specifics. After all, it wasn't convenient to tell him where I was. But after thinking about it, Han Wennan definitely had his reasons for not directly telling me. I didn't ask, but instead wrote back and told him that my current location was a bit hidden, so it wasn't convenient to find me. I asked him to tell me where he was, and I would go look for him. There were still a few days before we would meet, so I should still be able to make it if I went to see Han Wennan. Not long after I sent the message, Han Wennan sent me his location. He also urged me to hurry over and be careful on the way. He deliberately added this, which made me curious. Could it be that someone wanted to harm him? Or was I being watched? If that was the case, he must be in a very dangerous situation. Thinking about this, I didn't dare to delay any longer. I immediately left the Fire God Temple and rushed to Han Wennan's location. Even if I didn't delay my journey, it was already evening when I arrived at Han Wennan's hotel. After I knocked on the door, Han Wennan seemed to have sensed my aura. He immediately opened the door and welcomed me in. When I entered the room, he immediately asked me if anyone was following me. I was a little surprised, but I still lowered my head and pondered for a while. Then, I nodded to confirm that I wasn't being followed. Of course, this was just my intuition. If someone with a high cultivation base was secretly following me, it was normal that I couldn't detect him. Seeing that I was sure, he heaved a sigh of relief and invited me to sit down. After I sat down, I hurriedly asked him what was so important that he had to be in such a hurry. As I asked, he was straightforward and told me the reason. Just as I had expected, Han Wennan had just returned from the Peng Lai deity region. He had originally planned to stay in the Peng Lai deity region for a while. After all, the spiritual energy there was abundant and suitable for cultivation. Moreover, after the previous incident, the Peng Lai deity region's lord didn't drive him out. On the contrary, he invited him to play chess with him several times to relieve his boredom. In this way, the Peng Lai deity region tacitly allowed Han Wennan to stay in the deity region for a long time. However, just yesterday, quite a few people came to the originally empty celestial realm. These people were very strong, and Han Wennan couldn't see through their cultivation. Some of them had the demeanor of an immortal. He guessed that their strength should be on par with the Peng Lai deity region's lord. After listening to this, I began to ponder. Previously, I thought that the Peng Lai deity region was an immortal Xiaju who had ascended. However, after learning about the existence of Kunlun from Shang-Chi, I rejected this idea. Shang-Chi once said that Kunlun was the real deity region. The immortal realm that Xiaju had ascended wasn't something I could detect, but I could infer some things. Last time, the snake spirit and I were outside the Kunlun stone tablet, and the snake spirit even entered the stone tablet. However, no one appeared. From this, I could roughly infer that there was no one in Kunlun. Even if there was someone, they shouldn't be interested in me and the snake spirit, so they avoided us. This was completely different from the Peng Lai deity region. Previously, when he appeared in the Peng Lai deity region, he didn't say much to us, but it wasn't unintentional. At his cultivation level, he had already cultivated for many years. No matter what he did, he had a purpose. Based on this, the Peng Lai deity region might not have ascended to the immortal realm. Of course, even if he hadn't reached the immortal realm, I felt that he had at least reached the peak of Xiaoju, or even close to Xiaoju. As for Han Wennan, he had just mentioned that among the people who went to the Peng Lai deity region, there were a few whose cultivation levels were on par with the old man. According to my speculation, it was very likely that President Li and Celestial Master Zhang of Longhu Mountain, whom I had never seen before, were among them. Thinking of this, I asked Han Wennan to confirm this. However, he shook his head and told me that he had never seen President Li and Celestial Master Zhang of Longhu Mountain, so he wasn't sure if they were among the people. However, there were indeed many Taoist priests in the crowd, and a few of them seemed to be members of the Metaphysics Association. In this case, my speculation wasn't wrong. Even if they weren't the President and Celestial Master Zhang, these people were hidden masters from the two factions. I didn't know why the two factions had gathered in the Peng Lai deity region. Just as I was about to ask, Han Wennan took the initiative to tell me. He told me that among the people who went to the Peng Lai deity region, there were not only the two factions, but also people from the Buddhist faction. When he first saw the situation, he felt that it was a little strange. He thought that these people gathered together to discuss something important, and this matter was likely to affect all the cultivators in the world. Although he was curious, Han Wennan naturally didn't have the right to approach when they were discussing, so he couldn't know the specific content. However, later, Yi Piampian found him and told him to leave the Peng Lai deity region immediately and come out to find me. She also told me not to reveal any traces for the time being, as the three factions would send people to find me. Hearing this, I frowned slightly and hurriedly asked Han Wennan if Yi Piampian told him why the three factions were looking for me. He nodded. I was just about to talk about this. After Yi Piampian entrusted this matter to me, she told me that those people had been talking about the key, and occasionally mentioned you. They said that they were looking for you. Yi Piampian guessed that they were looking for you because of this. Now that he said this, I understood. The matter of the key was none other than Yi Piampian, Yi Paolan, and the woman from the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum. Yi Piampian and Yi Paolan naturally didn't have much to do with me. Now that the three factions were looking for me, it was most likely because they believed that the last key was in my hands. In that case, they also knew that the mountain and sea realm was about to open. Presumably, Yi Piampian was afraid that these people would cause trouble for me, so she sent Han Wennan down to inform me. This kind of friendship moved me. However, I didn't know if Yi Piampian knew that she was also one of the three keys. It seemed that old President Li had taken her as a disciple because of the matter of the mountain and sea realm. Old President Li really was a schemer. Unfortunately, when the mountain and sea realm opened, he would find that the world of immortals he had been looking forward to didn't exist. In my opinion, the idea of living forever was just a pipe dream. Having reached this point in his train of thought, I couldn't help but laugh coldly. Of course, Han Wennan noticed my expression and frowned. He asked me why I had such an expression, and if I knew something. He was quite quick-witted, and was able to tell at a glance. Of course, I knew what old President Li and the others were plotting. However, it was clear that Han Wennan didn't know anything about it. Considering his question, I wasn't sure if I should tell him about it. After thinking it over, I decided to keep it a secret from him. He had the Nuwa stone in his body, which was one of the 10 great divine items, and was also going to be used to open the mountain and sea realm. When the time came, someone would tell him the details, and I wouldn't need to say anything. However, when it came to the Nuwa stone, I suddenly felt worried for Han Wennan. Back in the heavenly grand ritual of Wangu Grotto, he told me that he had fallen unconscious after jumping into the pit in the Yinshang royal tomb. When he woke up, he found that the position of his heart had changed. At first, I didn't know what it was. It wasn't until I came into contact with some divine items that I learned that it was the Nuwa stone. The Nuwa stone had been left over from Nuwa's mending of the heavens. According to the legends, Nuwa, in order to save her beloved daughter, had poured 10,000 years of her cultivation base into a piece of multicolored jade left over from her mending of the heavens. From then on, the spirit stone had gained special powers. According to the ancient records, the Nuwa stone had the power to regenerate heaven and earth, and to resurrect people. In other words, Han Wunan had relied on this power to be reborn. Since opening the mountain and sea realm required the cooperation of the 10 great divine items, then the Nuwa stone in Han Wunan's body would be put to good use. Although I didn't know if I needed to take the Nuwa stone out of his body to use, if I did, then Han Wunan might die again. Chapter 846. Han Wunan saw that I was lost in thought and hadn't replied to him for a long time, so he couldn't help but call out to me. Hearing his call, I broke away from my thoughts and asked if there was anything else. When he saw that I was absent-minded, he didn't seem to want to say anything else, so he didn't bring up the previous question. He just said that he hadn't expected me to be so calm in my current difficult situation, which really made him admire me. However, he still reminded me to be careful, and then asked if I had a place to go. Seeing him like this made my heart warm. Although Han Wunan and I weren't as close as the fatty, and even back in the ancestral bloodline of Wen Mountain, he didn't dare to go against the wishes of the elders in his family and attack me. However, I also knew his situation at the time. After all these years, we've treated each other as good friends. In this current world, he was still willing to take the risk to come and inform me. This kind of friendship is really rare. Thinking about this, I suddenly had a thought. I couldn't bear to let Han Wunan get involved in the mountain and sea realm's affairs. However, after thinking about it carefully, I felt helpless. This wasn't something I could control. The Nuwa stone in his body was already closely linked to this matter. I could only hope that when the time came, I would be able to protect his life. After telling him the purpose of this trip, the two of us were silent for a while. Seeing that I was so calm, Han Wunan seemed to think that I was confident in dealing with this matter. His expression relaxed a little, and he began to chat with me. He took the initiative to change the topic, so I didn't bring up the matter of the mountain and sea realm. Instead, I told him what had happened after we parted. Unfortunately, regardless of whether it was the Fire God Temple or the Medicine King Valley, everything that had happened to me was a secret that I couldn't tell Han Wunan in detail. Therefore, after chatting for a while, he could clearly hear that I was holding back, and he seemed to have lost interest in continuing the conversation. He smiled and said, "You've come a long way and must be tired. It's getting late, so you should rest early." He was asking me to leave, so I didn't say anything else. I nodded and followed him to the room he had prepared for me. After resting for a whole day, I knocked on Han Wunan's door, intending to say goodbye. He knew my current situation, so he didn't try to keep me. He just told me that if I needed his help, I should send a message as soon as possible. I didn't refuse and nodded in agreement. After bidding farewell, I got on the car and headed back to the Fire God Temple. Along the way, I kept thinking about what Han Wunan had said. Although I already have the cultivation of Yang spirit, compared to the masters of the 3 sects, my strength is still weak. Not to mention the 3 sects encirclement, even if any one of them sent a person with the exceptional Yang spirit, I'm afraid it would be difficult for me to resist. Not to mention, there were still immortal-like existences like President Li, Celestial Master Zhang, and the ruler of Penglai. I didn't have any power to fight back against them. It was no wonder that Yi Piampian and Han Wunan were so worried and hurried over to send me a message. Since there was no way to defeat them, the only thing they could do was to protect themselves. However, there were not many places to hide in this world. Thinking about it carefully, even the Fire God Temple was not a safe place. Back then, the old president had personally gone there. If he wanted to find me, he would definitely not let go of this place. Only the Valley of the Medicine Masters and Wang Wu's cave were considered safe places. In this way, It would not hinder my plan to go to Wangwu's cave to cultivate. But before that, no matter what, I still have to go see Yen. Half a year was almost up, and I couldn't let go of Yen to wait for me. Even if there were people waiting there, I still had to go. After a bumpy day, I finally returned to the Shenangjia scenic area. As soon as I arrived, I concealed my aura and released my spiritual sense to constantly check the surroundings. After confirming that there were no problems, I walked forward for a while. The cycle repeated itself, and my speed was extremely slow. It wasn't that I was being overly cautious. After Han Wenan's warning, I was very clear about the crazy things the three major powers would do in order to obtain the key to the mountain and sea realm. Therefore, I had to be vigilant of any signs of trouble. It usually took me an hour to walk, but it took me more than 6 hours to walk out of the Shenangjia scenic area. I continued on my way to the Fire God Temple. However, after walking for a while, I suddenly sensed that there seemed to be fighting in front of me. I immediately stopped and focused my senses. From the aura in front of me, the two people fighting had yang spirit cultivation, and I was very familiar with the aura of one of them. It was the Qingqiu clan. The other person was an ordinary Dao Qi Yang God Celestial Master. I couldn't help but frown. I had already expected that someone from the Metaphysics Association would come here to look for me, so I wasn't surprised that a Yang God Celestial Master had appeared. But why did the Qingqiu clan come here? Could it be that they were also looking for me? Now that Yao Yao was the leader of the Qingqiu clan, it seemed normal for her to send someone from the Qingqiu clan to look for me. But after thinking about it, I quickly eliminated that possibility. I hadn't brought Yao Yao to the Fire God Temple, and I hadn't mentioned this place to her. Even if she had sent someone to look for me, how could it be such a coincidence that they happened to come here? After eliminating that possibility, I thought of something else. In the Qingqiu clan, only Yao Yao and the High Priest had Yang God cultivation. However, the person fighting in front of me also had Yang God cultivation, but it wasn't them. Did the Qingqiu clan have a third Yang God Celestial Master, or was this person not from the Qingqiu clan? I was slightly curious. After thinking for a while, I decided to go over and check it out. No matter if the Qingqiu clan's fox demon had come here by chance or on purpose, since I had encountered him, I couldn't just stand by and watch. Moreover, we had the same enemy. If I didn't get rid of that Yang God Celestial Master, my whereabouts would be exposed. When that happened, more people would be attracted, and I wouldn't be able to meet with Tao Wu in peace. Thinking about that, I lifted my feet and walked in the direction of the two auras. After a while, a man and a woman appeared fighting beside a call in front of me. The man was quite old. He had a black and white beard and wore a moon-colored robe. He had Dao Qi cultivation, and it was obvious that he was from the Metaphysics Association. However, his face was unfamiliar, and I hadn't seen him before. The person fighting was a young woman dressed in a green robe. Her body was surrounded by a thick demonic aura. It was indeed the Qingqiu clan that I had sensed earlier. I had originally planned to observe quietly from the side. Who knew that although the two of them were fighting, they were paying attention to their surroundings. As soon as I appeared, they stopped fighting and turned to look at me. They had discovered me immediately. The first person to react was the person from the Metaphysics Association. He obviously recognized me. After seeing me, he smiled and stroked his beard. The old president really has a godlike foresight. Zhou Yi, you really came here. Since that's the case, come back with me. Hearing him speak, I frowned slightly and carefully checked his cultivation. However, I found that I couldn't see through him at all. His cultivation was at least at the middle stage of the Yang God realm. No wonder he looked so calm. He had probably seen through my cultivation and felt that he could defeat me. I ignored him for the time being and turned to look at the woman from the Qingqiu clan. To my surprise, I couldn't see through this woman's cultivation. The Yang God Celestial Master from the Qingqiu clan was enough to surprise me. I had never thought that her cultivation would be above mine. This was really incredible. Although I was shocked, I didn't ask much. The Qingqiu clan had an extraordinary origin. Previously, the high priest had told me that since the ancient war, the bloodline of the Qingqiu clan had weakened a lot. That was why they had declined today. However, they were an extremely powerful branch of the monster clan. They had a deep foundation, so there might be people who had newly awakened their bloodline. It was obvious that a lot of things had happened in the Qingqiu country during the time I had left. While I was thinking, the woman seemed to notice my gaze. She immediately bowed to me and said, "Greetings, divine envoy." She had revealed her identity. Although I still had many questions in my mind, it wasn't the time to ask. Thus, I just nodded, indicating that she didn't need to be so polite. The woman's behavior was naturally seen by the old man. He was obviously quite disdainful of the two of us. He snorted and said, "I didn't expect that a remnant of the witch clan like you would be involved with these monsters. You really are in cahoots with them." I didn't care about his words, but the woman from the Qingqiu clan seemed to be quite angry. She said to me, "Divine envoy, this person's cultivation is at the late stage of the Yang God realm. Divine envoy, please wait a moment. After I kill him, I will greet divine envoy." After saying that, she raised her leg and rushed forward. The two of them quickly fought again. I didn't act rashly for the time being. After watching for a while, I found that the woman from the Qingqiu clan seemed to have been injured in the previous battle. At this time, she was fighting with the old man and seemed to be in a difficult situation. However, overall, their cultivation levels were about the same. The old man wouldn't be able to gain any advantage for a while. After understanding the situation, I didn't intend to wait any longer. The situation was complicated. I didn't know how many people from the Metaphysics Association had come. It would be safer to get rid of this old man as soon as possible. Thus, I opened my mouth and spat out the Xian Yuan sword and joined the battle. The old man was quite knowledgeable. He raised his eyes and glanced at the sword in my hand. He grinned and said, "The Xian Yuan sword is really in your hands. Well, I'd rather not take the monster pill today. I'm going to take your Xian Yuan sword." I snorted coldly. This old man was really greedy. Although my cultivation was slightly lower than theirs, in terms of combat power, I didn't think I would lose to the middle stage of the Yang God realm. I could even fight with the late stage of the Yang God realm. I was afraid that he wouldn't be able to enjoy the Xian Yuan sword. In the veins of the heavens, the Tao Qi was running wildly, continuously transferring to the Xian Yuan sword. When I rushed in front of the old man, the Xian Yuan sword was full of qi. However, I didn't feel tired at all. It seemed that my strength had improved a lot in the past few months. The woman from the Qingqiu clan naturally noticed that the Xian Yuan sword in my hand was extraordinary. She turned around and stopped fighting with the old man. She stepped aside so that I had enough space to use the Xian Yuan sword qi. Seeing this, I immediately twisted my waist and stepped out of the 9-star heavenly dipper. The power in my hand suddenly increased, and I swung the Xian Yuan sword at the old man. In the blink of an eye, the Xian Yuan sword qi shot out like lightning, heading straight for his face. The old man talked big, but he was cautious. He seemed to know that the power of the Xian Yuan sword couldn't be matched. His body flashed, ready to dodge. Chapter 847. I turned my wrist and gently twisted the Xian Yuan sword. The sword qi moved with it and continued to chase after the old man. At the same time, I looked at the Qingqiu woman and motioned for her to attack from the front and back with me. We had to get rid of the old man as soon as possible. The Qingqiu woman was also a Yang God celestial master, so she naturally understood the meaning of my gaze. With a turn of my body, I went to the other side of the old man and shot a silver needle at him. Apparently, the old man hadn't expected that we would launch a pincer attack. He paused for a moment, and then his moon-colored robe suddenly swelled up. His beard and hair moved. he shouted and used some unknown method to bounce the silver needles away. At the same time, his body moved a few meters to the side, avoiding the Xianyuan sword Qi's attack. Although the old man had managed to escape, he had clearly used up a lot of his energy. He stood there motionless for a while. Taking advantage of his weakness had always been the only way to win. Thus, I didn't give him any time to breathe. I swung my sword again and hit him hard. In a hurry, the power of the Taoist Qi in the sword was not too strong. However, my goal wasn't to kill him in one blow, but to force him back. The old man began to retreat to the side after receiving the heavy blow. However, he was strong. My move could only push him a few meters away. He was still not within the range of the Xianyuan sword Qi. Seeing that the sword Qi was approaching, the old man seemed to realize what we were thinking. He turned around and charged at me instead of retreating. His hands were wrapped in thick Taoist Qi, and his eyes were full of murderous intent. Seeing him charge at me, I waved my hand. Shaman Qi flowed in front of me and set up a dark green barrier in an attempt to block his attack. At the same time, I had already grasped the jade bracelet in front of my chest and quickly replenished the Taoist Qi that I had lost when using the Xianyuan sword. He was extremely fast and hit the Shaman Qi barrier in the blink of an eye. With my cultivation, it was naturally difficult to block his attack using only Shaman Qi. Thus, I had prepared a backup plan and was waiting for him to break the barrier. However, I didn't expect that when his palm fell, the Shaman Qi barrier buzzed, but it didn't break. It was obvious that this old man was also an arrow at the end of its flight. He could not fully display his cultivation. I was overjoyed and was about to make my move, but his body suddenly trembled as he was firmly locked in place. When I took a closer look, I saw that the Green Mountains woman had taken action. She had used a clump of silvery hair to control the old man from behind. It seemed that after the old man was angered by me, his attention had been completely focused on me, giving the fox girl an opportunity to take advantage of him. Even though this old man was already at the end of his tether, I still didn't think that he would be so easily subdued. However, he didn't expect that the fox girl's figure would suddenly disappear, turning into a pink mist that completely enveloped the old man. It wrapped around him and directly sent him flying backwards. Obviously, she planned to drag the old man to the place where the Xianyuan sword would fall and use the Xianyuan sword Qi to kill him. However, her move was not very wise. Although my cultivation was only at the early stage of Yang spirit, my strength had increased rapidly due to the continuous strengthening of the Yang spirit in recent months. The Xianyuan sword Qi that I had used earlier was also several times stronger than before. Moreover, I had the support of the 9 stars Heavenly Dipper. If they fell into the range of the Xianyuan sword Qi, the old man would not feel good, but I'm afraid that it would be difficult for her to escape. In the blink of an eye, the two arrived at the place where the Xianyuan sword Qi would fall. The fox girl had no intention of stopping. She took the old man and rushed straight into the Xianyuan sword Qi. In this situation, I couldn't help her. I could only watch the battle while quickly absorbing the dragon Qi in the jade bracelet, trying to give the old man a fatal blow after he was seriously injured. With this in mind, the two had already met the Xianyuan sword Qi. There was a loud bang, and a strong wave of air came from a position only a few meters away from me. This wave of air seemed to be powerful and unstoppable. It uprooted the flowers and plants within a few hundred meters of the surrounding area, and dust scattered everywhere. However, I was not distracted by this. Instead, I focused on the location of the explosion. I thought that both of them would be sent flying backward after receiving this blow, but I didn't expect that only the fox girl would be sent flying. She was hit by the Xianyuan sword Qi and flew dozens of meters away. A few seconds later, she fell to the ground. Her chest rose and fell slightly, and then she spat out a mouthful of blood. Her face instantly turned pale. Only then did I realize that after the woman had been attacked by the Xianyuan sword qi, she had saved her last bit of strength to keep the old man in the sword qi, which led to the current situation. After a while, the smoke and dust from the explosion had dispersed, revealing a deep pit on the ground. I was a little surprised that the old man hadn't been sent flying backward like the fox girl. But now, the scene gave me a reasonable explanation. At the bottom of the deep pit, the old man stood steadily. Above his head floated a figure that looked exactly like him. I easily recognized that it was the old man's young spirit. I didn't expect that at such a critical moment, the old man would use a life-saving method and use the yang spirit to resist the Xianyuan sword qi. However, I wasn't surprised at all. Although I could fill the Xianyuan sword with Dao Qi, I was only at the early stage of the Yang God Celestial Master. Even with the addition of the 9 stars Heavenly Dipper, I could only use about 20% of the Xianyuan sword's power. For an ordinary Yang God Celestial Master, this move was enough to seriously injure him. But when I first saw this old man, I was quite surprised. On the surface, this person only had the cultivation of the late stage of the Yang God realm, but the fox girl and I couldn't seriously injure him. His real strength was probably at the great perfection of the Yang God realm. Even so, it wouldn't be easy for the old man to use the power of the Yang spirit to fight against the ancient divine weapon. Although I couldn't seriously injure him, I could at least injure him a little. With this thought in mind, I didn't dare to stop. While the old man hadn't recovered, I gave him a powerful blow. At this time, my physical strength had recovered, and the Dao Qi in my heavenly veins was flowing rapidly, all of it being sent to the Xianyuan sword. Although the old man's yang spirit power was strong and could barely resist the Xianyuan sword qi, the power of the yang spirit was still a mortal cultivator's method. It wasn't enough to compete with the divine weapon in my hand. If I used a few Xianyuan sword qi in a row, I would definitely be able to kill him. Thinking of this, I had already arrived behind the old man. He was strong, so he could naturally sense my actions and quickly turned around. Only then did I see his current state. The old man's face was as white as paper, and blood was constantly seeping out of the corner of his mouth. His chest was heaving up and down, and it seemed that he had suffered a lot of damage. However, I knew that he didn't have this kind of strength because the yang spirit hadn't faded. Obviously, it hadn't hurt his foundation. With this thought in mind, I didn't dare to stop moving and immediately slashed at his neck. Unexpectedly, the corners of his mouth suddenly rose, and a playful expression appeared on his face. Seeing this, I was shocked. His smile was really strange. Could it be that I had fallen into his trap? With this thought in mind, I couldn't help but be distracted, and my hand movements slowed down a bit. Unexpectedly, the old man took advantage of this opportunity to quickly make a hand seal. In just a moment, the yang spirit above my head produced a strong aura and rushed toward me. The old man's yang spirit power was really strong, so I didn't dare to underestimate this brutal power. Then, I changed the direction of the Xianyuan sword in my hand and swung it hard, sending the Xianyuan sword qi toward the incoming power. In the blink of an eye, the two powers collided and produced a thunderous sound. The resulting huge wave was like a sharp blade. Even my young god celestial master, who has a tough body, found it hard to endure. The power of these two forces can be imagined. At the moment, the Taoist energy in my body had been used up, so I could only quickly circulate the shaman energy in my heavenly veins to form a barrier in front of me to resist the wave. After a few seconds, the surroundings became calm again. In order to preserve my strength, I also dispersed the shaman energy barrier. All of this happened in less than 10 seconds. At this time, the fox girl, who had been sent flying, slowly walked over. However, her clothes were ragged, so it must have been caused by the wave just now. In her current state, she was barely able to withstand it. It seemed that the barrier she had set up earlier had blocked most of the Xianyuan sword qi. Just as I was looking at the fox girl, the old man in front of me suddenly said, "Child of the Zhou family, the people of the Metaphysics Association say that you are a genius, but I don't think so. Today's battle has really made my eyes light up. You are worthy of me doing my best to fight against you." Hearing this, my face showed a very surprised expression. The old man's various methods had already made me speechless, but he said that he hadn't used his full strength. Looking at the old man's appearance, it didn't seem like he was speaking carelessly. Could it be that I was blind and this old man wasn't just a young spirit celestial master? Thinking about this, I hurriedly signaled the fox girl next to me to move back. This old man was really cunning. At such a close distance, if he suddenly attacked, it would be hard for us to react. Thus, the two of us moved back a dozen meters. Seeing us like this, the old man didn't chase after us. He just stood there and snorted. One of his hands formed a sword finger and slashed at his wrist. In the blink of an eye, a large amount of blood gushed out from his wrist. However, the blood didn't drip on the ground. Instead, he used his Taoist energy to wrap it up, turning it into blood-red blood bead. Under his control, these blood beads constantly revolved around the Taoist energy around his body. This move of his was strange. I couldn't figure it out in a short time, but I knew that it should be his strongest killing move. Thinking about this, I signaled the fox girl to prepare to fight the enemy. At this moment, it was a battle to the death. Today, we must kill this old man here and now. After hearing my words, the fox girl didn't dare to be negligent. She closed her eyes and after a few seconds, the monster energy around her body surged. Her body turned and she soared into the sky, stirring up gusts of wind around her. When she landed, she turned into a silver-white fox with 5 tails. Seeing that she had already transformed into her true form, I didn't hesitate and planned to use the witchcraft energy transformation technique. Previously, after learning the Taoist energy transformation technique, I tried to use witchcraft energy instead. In essence, the Taoist energy and witchcraft energy were both cultivating spiritual energy. Moreover, my yang spirit and witchcraft energy had the same body, so the Taoist energy transformation technique and witchcraft energy transformation technique weren't too different. Chapter 848. The blood beads that had been revolving around him had fused into a blood-red ribbon. The old man's eyes were closed at first, but when he opened them, his pupils were gone, leaving only the whites of his eyes, making him look rather terrifying. Although I didn't know what technique he had used, from the commotion, it didn't seem to be the work of a righteous person. However, I didn't have time to think about it. What happened next confirmed my guess. The blood-colored thread that had left his body circled around the old man a few times before suddenly flying towards the Yang God above his head. The Yang God opened its mouth and directly swallowed the blood-colored thread into its stomach. After a while, the Yang spirit's body was surrounded by a blood-red mist, and the air was filled with a murderous aura. The Yang spirit's body instantly grew several times larger. It struggled violently, as if it wanted to break free from the old man's control and attack us. Looking at this scene, I felt a sense of familiarity. Back at the back mountain of the Jade Buddha Temple, when I was fighting with Jinshan Temple's Long Pu Zhuang, the technique he used to control the Sakyamuni image was somewhat similar to the blood-red Yang spirit in front of me. I was slightly startled. Could it be that this old man had also practiced Nanyang sorcery? After thinking for a while, I instinctively ruled out this conjecture. This old man was also an important person in the Metaphysics Society. If he wanted a technique, he could get it. There was no need for him to study the Nanyang people's petty tricks. I had just ruled out this possibility when the old man stared at us with his pale eyes. His voice was angry and sharp. I haven't used this blood sacrifice Yang spirit technique for dozens of years. I didn't expect that it would be you who would force me into this situation. All right, I'll let you experience the power of this Nanyang secret technique. It really was a Nanyang secret technique. I frowned. This was the first time I had heard of this blood sacrifice yang spirit technique. Although it was a Nanyang secret technique, from what the old man said, its power should be quite extraordinary. Otherwise, he wouldn't have kept it as a life-saving technique. While I was thinking about this, the blood-colored sun god dashed toward us. At that moment, the witchcraft energy in my body had just moved to my life palace. I had just started cultivating the technique of transforming Tao energy into form, so I wasn't familiar with it yet. Moreover, I was using witchcraft energy at that moment, so I was unable to resist the blood-colored yang spirit's attack. I could only ask the fox girl next to me if I could buy some time. After listening, she nodded without any hesitation. Oracle, get ready. I'll block this wave. I couldn't help but say that the vixen in front of me made me look at her in a different light. When I was in the Green Hill country, I once talked to the high priest about the character of the Green Hill tribe. According to the high priest, the Green Hill tribe is generally timid and cowardly. The reason they have survived until now is largely due to this. In the process of retrieving the monster core, I have indeed witnessed this character of the Green Hill tribe. But now, the fox girl was completely different. After responding to me, she turned her head and stared at the old man's blood-colored young spirit. She was full of heroic spirit and didn't look the least bit timid. It wasn't the time to be surprised. After the fox girl welcomed the old man's young spirit, I hurriedly continued to prepare the witchcraft energy transformation technique. I quickly guided the witchcraft energy into the young spirit and put aside all distracting thoughts. I visualized the form that I needed to transform. In just a few seconds, the yang spirit spat out a thick silver needle. At the same time, a similar silver needle appeared in my palm. This was what I was visualizing and also what my witchcraft energy would transform into. After the silver needle appeared, I felt a sense of exhaustion in my heaven meridian, and my body became weak. Although the silver needle in my hand had taken shape, it hadn't completely fused with my witchcraft energy. I couldn't use it to join the battle, so I could only stand on the side and watch. At this moment, the fox girl had arrived next to the blood-colored young spirit. She showed her real body again and swelled up. She twisted her huge body and bit the blood-colored young spirit. However, just as she was about to bite the young spirit, the blood-colored young spirit suddenly stopped. It raised its hands, and a wisp of evil energy shot out from its palms. It aimed at the fox girl's face. The wind from the palm hadn't arrived yet, but the energy it carried had condensed the surrounding mist into frost, which fell to the ground one drop at a time. After the frost fell to the ground, it turned into wisps of black smoke that corroded the weeds on the ground, leaving no trace of life. This method chilled me. I had never thought that the yang spirit blood sacrifice technique would be so powerful. If the fox girl was hit by this palm, she would be corroded like the weed. With that thought in mind, I became anxious and hurried to shout at the fox girl, "Don't take this attack head-on." The fox girl also noticed the changes in the surroundings. Before I could finish, she twisted her body and dodged to the side. However, after she dodged, the evil energy headed straight for me. I didn't have much shaman energy left in my body, so I was afraid I wouldn't be able to resist this evil energy. With that thought in mind, I hurried to urge the silver needle in my hand. However, the silver needle seemed to be out of my control and wouldn't listen to me. Seeing that the aura of death was approaching, I didn't know how to deal with it. Beads of sweat rolled down my forehead. When the aura was only a few meters away from me, I had no choice but to throw the silver needle in my hand, which hadn't fully revealed its power, toward the evil energy. As soon as the silver needle left my hand, it separated into hundreds of tiny silver needles that pierced the evil energy. After they collided with each other, the silver needles didn't have much defensive power since they were my means of attack. Seeing that they were about to pierce through the evil energy, I had no choice but to read the Heavenly Master's word spell and shout, "Explode." In an instant, hundreds of silver needles made of shaman energy exploded. Naturally, the evil Een energy couldn't resist it and turned into nothingness in an instant. After it disappeared, a wave of air was generated. At this moment, I was exhausted and couldn't resist the wave of air. My chest seemed to have been hit, and I was thrown dozens of meters away by the wave of air. I fell to the ground. I tasted something sweet in my throat and spat out a mouthful of blood. After a few seconds, I propped myself up and looked at the battle. Previously, I had used the shaman energy transformation technique with great difficulty, but I didn't have time to deal with the blood-colored young god. I used it to save my life in a hurry, but now I didn't have the strength to use other technique. The fox girl seemed to be seriously injured. She was curled up on the ground, panting slightly. Her situation didn't seem to be much better than mine. My brain was working frantically, trying to find a way to survive. However, the shaman energy in my body wasn't enough. Without the supportive power, it was difficult to use any technique. That old man was ruthless, so he obviously wouldn't give me a chance to breathe. What should I do now? While I was thinking, the old man laughed wantonly. He looked at me from afar and said, "Joey, don't be so depressed. Decades ago, when I was still at the peak of the seal, I used this blood sacrifice technique to kill a young god celestial master. After decades of cultivation, my strength is close to the peak of the young god realm. With the power of this technique, even a rush realm cultivator wouldn't be able to deal with it easily. You're only at the early stage of the young god realm, yet you can withstand this move of mine. Even if you die, you should have no regret." After saying that, he didn't give me any time to respond. The blood-colored young god's hand once again produced a wave of evil energy and headed toward my face. He was really as ruthless as I thought. He didn't give me any time to breathe. In the face of this evil energy, I couldn't deal with it at all. Just as I was frantically thinking of a countermeasure, the fox girl in the distance, who was also injured, seemed to see that I didn't have the strength to resist. She suddenly jumped up from the ground and rushed toward the evil energy, as if she wanted to resist this attack. I couldn't help but feel anxious. How could a human body resist the power of this evil energy? Although I was moved by her action, it was no different from hitting a stone with an egg. It wasn't a wise move. As I was about to stop her, the old man standing behind the blood-colored young god suddenly made a move. His feet moved like the wind, and in a flash, he appeared behind the fox girl. He looked so smart, and he didn't look injured at all. Before I could react, the old man rubbed his hands and released a mass of Taoist energy. He fiercely hit the fox girl's back and coldly shouted, "Animals like you don't deserve to die under my young god realm." As soon as he said that, the fox girl screamed and quickly fell to the ground. After receiving this attack, the fox girl's injuries became more serious. After falling to the ground, her body kept twitching. After trying several times, she didn't have the strength to stand up. She could only turn her head to look at me. Her scarlet eyes were filled with guilt. Looking at her eyes, I also felt sad. Although I was prepared for today's matter, I didn't expect that I would encounter such a strong enemy. At this moment, I no longer had the strength to escape. I could only watch helplessly as the evil Een energy approached me. This feeling of helplessness was quite familiar. I had encountered a similar situation in the Spirit Lock Tower. I had once sunk into a bottomless abyss and was on the verge of death. In the end, Bayan had woken me up. Later on, I had asked Bayan why she had appeared in the Spirit Lock Tower. She had told me that she had never left the Fire God Temple. The voice that had sounded in my head that day was just my imagination. But at this time, my mind was blank, and I didn't even think of Bayan. As the aura of death approached, my heart was terrifyingly calm. In the blink of an eye, the evil energy was approaching, so I simply closed my eyes. But at this time, in the midst of the chaos, the figure of the monster Emperor June that I had seen in the Medicine King Valley suddenly flashed in my mind. Before I could react, there was another roar in my ears. After a few seconds, the surroundings returned to normal. I was a little confused. I didn't know what had happened, but I felt that I hadn't been hit by the evil energy. I quickly opened my eyes and looked around. I was in a deep pit, and not far from me was a silver-white fox. She was staring at me with burning eyes, and tears kept flowing out of her eyes. Chapter 849. After my mind cleared up, I lifted my eyes to look around. I didn't dare to be careless. However, I couldn't find the old man. He seemed to have left. I felt strange. The evil energy had almost reached my face, but why hadn't it hit me? Moreover, he hadn't killed the fox yet. Why did he do that? Did an expert come to help me? After thinking about it, it was possible. However, I was afraid that only the evil spirit could save me in such a short time. He must have known that Bai and I were going to be together for half a year. That was why he came to find me. When he saw that I was facing a strong enemy, he came to save me when I was on the verge of death. The old man knew that he couldn't defeat the evil spirit, so he hurriedly ran away. The evil spirit chased after him. That was how the two of them disappeared. In this way, it was indeed reasonable. Now that I had escaped from death, I exhaled in relief. I propped myself up and slowly walked toward the fox girl. After a while, I came to her and asked, "How are your wounds?" She didn't answer me immediately. After a while, she said, "Fox King's power." Her eyes were bright and she looked a little surprised. However, I didn't understand what she meant. I asked, "What is this Fox King's power? Is it the reason why she came to Shenangjia?" After listening to me, the fox girl shook her head. She was a little emotional, and her words were incoherent. I didn't understand what she meant. Seeing that I didn't understand, she became more anxious. After a while, she calmed down and finished speaking. According to her, she thought that we would all die here today. However, when she was desperate, the Fox King's power suddenly appeared and defeated the blood-colored Yang spirit. As soon as the Yang spirit was destroyed, the old man turned into smoke and disappeared in the air. The Fox King that the fox girl mentioned was Monster King Ling. I knew that, but Monster King Ling had already died and reincarnated. Why did the fox girl say that the Fox King's power had suddenly appeared? I had this question in my mind, so I blurted it out. The fox girl saw that I had interrupted her and hurried to explain. The Fox King's power had shot out from my forehead. The Qing Qiu clan had a close relationship with the Fox Monarch, and the Fox Monarch had set up a restriction in their bloodline. The moment the golden light appeared, the blood in the fox girl's body quickly churned, and a wave of pressure almost suffocated her. Only then did she determine that the golden light was the power of the Fox King. Her words reminded me of the image of the monster Emperor June that had appeared in my mind when I was on the brink of death. Then, I heard a loud explosion. In that case, the Fox King's power had appeared at that time. However, when the fox girl mentioned the golden light that shot out from my forehead, I thought of another matter. When I was in the wasteland behind the Jade Buddha Temple and was suppressed by the Pure Dragon Village, a golden light also appeared on the forehead of my young spirit. With that golden light, I disintegrated the Pure Dragon Village after the Yang spirit had left my body. From this, it could be seen that the golden light back then was also the so-called Fox King's power. When I advanced to the Yang spirit stage, I felt that the mark on the forehead of the Yang spirit was a little strange. In that case, the mark was the symbol of the Fox King's power. In that case, the Fox King's power had always existed in the Yang spirit and would only be triggered in times of danger. Since the power came from the monster Emperor June, it was normal that the old man and his blood-colored Yang spirit couldn't resist it. However, the Fox King's power was really strong. If I could control it as I wished, I would be invincible in the world. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but feel excited. However, if I only thought about it by myself, it would definitely be of little use. It would be better to wait for the evil spirit to return and ask him about it. In that case, I didn't dwell on this matter anymore. However, the Fox Girl kept asking me why I had the Fox King's power. From her words, it seemed that the Fox King's power was extremely precious. Even if I was the god messenger sent by the Fox King, I wouldn't be able to obtain such power. I was quite curious, but I didn't ask her. The more I spoke, the easier it would be for me to expose myself. However, she was willing to sacrifice herself to protect me. This friendship really moved me. Now that she kept asking, I couldn't just ignore her. However, I couldn't tell her the real reason, so I could only make up an excuse. I said that the Fox King had suddenly summoned me when I was on the verge of death. Seeing that I was in danger, he gave me some power to save my life. After hearing that, she became excited and asked if the Fox King was all right. I knew that the Qingqiu tribe had been waiting for the Fox King to return for several thousand years. If I told her about the monster Emperor Jun's death, I was afraid that something unexpected would happen. I could only make up another excuse and say that the Fox King was all right. After hearing that, the Fox Girl didn't hesitate and said that she understood. She didn't pursue the matter any further. The matter had been resolved, but I still had some doubts in my heart that I wanted to ask her about. Due to her injuries, she couldn't walk around. It was a good time to ask her about her doubts. With that in mind, I asked the Fox Girl why she had come to Shenangjia. After hearing that, the Fox Girl quickly told me the details. From her, I learned that some time ago, the High Priest had divined that the mountain and sea realm was about to open. He then ordered the elders of the Qingqiu tribe, whose cultivation bases were higher than the Yang God's celestial master, to inform the demon clan in the outside world. They were to go to the Qingqiu state to discuss the matter of welcoming the Fox King. She had come to Shenangjia to inform the Lu tribe. She mentioned that the High Priest had divined that the mountain and sea realm was about to open, which wasn't beyond my expectations. Recently, whether it was the Shaman tribe, the Buddhist sect, or the Xian Dao tribe, all of them had been discussing this matter. With the demon clan trapped in the mountain and sea realm, it was normal for the Qingqiu tribe to be anxious. However, all of them had their own plans. The Shaman tribe had opened the mountain and sea realm to prevent the Shaman tribe from going extinct. The Xian Dao tribe and the Buddhist sect believed that the mountain and sea realm was actually the world of immortals, and that opening the mountain and sea realm was to seek eternal life. However, the demon clan wanted to open the mountain and sea realm because they thought that the monster Emperor Jun was still there. They wanted to welcome him back and lead the demon clan back to the peak. They all had their own standpoints, and I couldn't decide who was right or wrong. However, there was no doubt that the mountain and sea realm had to be opened. The matter gradually became clear, and there was nothing to ponder about. However, the Fox Girl had mentioned that the High Priest had asked Yang God, Heavenly Master and above elders to come out and deliver the message. That meant that the Fox Girl in front of me was an elder. Combined with my previous conjecture, the state of Qingqiu had really undergone earth-shaking changes. In just a few short months, the positions of elders had all changed hands. Looking at the Fox Girl's appearance, she shouldn't be more than 100 years old. If it had been a few months ago, no matter how talented she was, her cultivation base would have been limited by her bloodline. But now, why was she at the Middle Yang God Heavenly Master realm? I really couldn't figure out the reason behind this, and I was very curious. I quickly asked the Fox Girl what had happened in the state of Qingqiu over the past few months. The Fox Girl was very intelligent, and as soon as she heard my question, she understood what I meant. She immediately explained to me. According to her, ever since Yao Yao had become the clan leader, there had been no opposition in the clan. Even some stubborn people didn't dare to openly criticize her. Yao Yao knew that if she wanted all the people to submit to her, she had to do something that would satisfy everyone. She spent a lot of time and visited the people before she found out that the biggest problem the clan was facing was the speed of cultivation. This matter had troubled the people of Qingqiu for thousands of years. For thousands of years, the people of Qingqiu had been working hard, and they knew that it wouldn't be solved in a day. After she asked the high priest for advice, she found out that the root cause of this situation was the serious defect in the bloodline of Qing Qiu. As long as the defect in the bloodline was solved, the problem of cultivation would be solved. However, it wasn't that the previous clan leaders couldn't see the crux of the problem, but because their bloodline was the same as the people of Qing Qiu, it was useless to use their bloodline as a guide. However, Yao Yao was different. She was from the Tushan clan and had a powerful bloodline. If she used her blood as a guide, she might be able to completely solve the defect in the bloodline of Qing Qiu. Since there was a method, Yao Yao naturally wouldn't let it go. After discussing it with the high priest, she started preparing to use her blood as a guide. However, this matter couldn't be guaranteed, so she could only choose a few people from the clan to test it first. She didn't expect that these people would really solve the defect in the bloodline. Not only that, but their cultivation talent also improved significantly. The Qing Qiu country was originally a secluded place, and its location was very hidden. It had abundant spiritual energy, and the clan had a complete set of cultivation method. In less than a few months, most of the people who were used as test subjects had advanced to the Yangshen Celestial Master level. The fox girl in front of me was one of those test subjects. At this point, the fox girl didn't say anything more. Although she was a test subject, according to the final result, she was still very satisfied. In just a few months, she was able to rise from the glorious consciousness realm to the Yangshen Celestial Master level. This speed is really too shocking. Even someone like me who has all 5 elements can only look at it and sigh. However, although I don't know what kind of secret method Yao Yao used to use her blood as a guide to have such an effect, based on the strength that the fox girl showed earlier, she hasn't really reached the level of the Yangshen Celestial Master. In other words, this secret method can only improve the surface of the cultivation, and the real strength still needs to be accumulated through continuous cultivation. Now that the matter was clear and the fox girl's strength had recovered a lot, I didn't plan to stay here any longer. I told her that I still had something to do, so I said goodbye. I also asked her to send my regards to Yao Yao after returning to the Qing Qiu country. After saying that, I got up to leave. However, I hadn't taken a few steps when the fox girl called me again. I didn't know what else she wanted, so I turned around and asked her. I didn't expect that she would tell me that she had been here for a few days, but she still hadn't found the whereabouts of the Lu clan. She asked me if I knew their location. Speaking of the Lu clan, I knew about them. The Lu clan is one of the 5 clans of the Grey Fox and White Willow, which refers to the Snake clan. However, the sudden mention of the snake race reminded me of something. When I first entered Shenangjia, the snake spirit told me that he had sensed his wife's aura here, so he asked me to let him go and find her. Later, he didn't return for a long time, so I went to find him. Finally, I found the couple in a secret place. Chapter 850. I thought of the little white snake, but I wasn't sure if the fox girl was looking for them or not, so I asked her about it. The fox girl didn't seem to know either. After thinking for a while, she said, "Although this place is big, it's impossible to say that there are 2 Lu clans. It should be her clan." Her words made sense, so I nodded. "If that's the case, I should be able to help you find out some information." The fox girl had risked her life to save me, so I had no reason not to help her now. After I said that, I immediately summoned the snake spirit. The snake spirit was still as lazy as usual. After it came out, it stretched its body and smiled. "What's the matter?" I pointed around and asked, "Do you know if there are any Lu clans around Shenangjia? If there are, where are they?" The snake spirit rolled its eyes at me and pouted. "Why are you asking me that? I'm not familiar with this place, and I'm not a member of the Lu clan. I'm a dragon, and they're snakes. How can it be the same?" "The snake spirit isn't a member of the Lu clan?" I frowned. He had met the little white snake, Hui Hui, and his original body was a snake. I subconsciously thought that he was a member of the Lu clan, but I was wrong. I wanted to ask about Hui Hui again, but the snake spirit waved its hand and continued, I've been in Shenangjia before, but I've never had any contact with the Lu clan. Hui Hui and I met each other halfway, and we became husband and wife. Perhaps it was because of the mention of Hui Hui, the snake spirit suddenly stopped. She thought about it and continued, I seem to have heard from Hui Hui that she is a member of the Lu clan. Because the elders in her family forced her to marry an ugly guy, she ran away and met me. Why don't we look for Hui Hui? I didn't need to answer. The fox girl had finally heard the news of the Lu clan, so she nodded in agreement. The snake spirit didn't seem to see the fox girl. When it heard her voice, it turned to look at her with a serious face. Who are you? Fundamentally speaking, the snake spirit was a scale insect, while the fox girl was a monster. They belonged to the same species. In addition, the fox girl had the cultivation of yang spirit, so it was normal for the snake spirit to be surprised. I told her about the fox lady's identity. Of course, the spirit snake knew about the Green Hill tribe. After hearing that she was the fox lady, her expression returned to normal. She nodded and said, Let's go and find Hui Hui. She should still be living in that canyon. The canyon that the serpent spirit mentioned was the Crimson Cloud Gorge that I had discovered when I first came here. I had gone to see Hui Hui with the serpent spirit that time, so I was naturally familiar with the way. I didn't need the serpent spirit to lead the way, so I directly walked toward the gorge. Along the way, the snake spirit's face was very calm. He didn't look excited to see his wife at all. It was normal. Aside from the first time I had come here, this fellow had said that he missed Hui Hui very much. After that, I had come here many times, and the snake spirit had only gone to see Hui Hui once. This fellow was quite fickle. I guessed he didn't care much about his wife. After 1 hour, we arrived at the Crimson Cloud Gorge. This place was completely different from the first time we had come here. It used to be a barren land, but now it was overgrown with weeds and there was no trace of Inchi. The first time I had seen Hui Hui, she had said that the reason she had hidden in this gorge wasn't just to avoid being chased by others. More importantly, there was an army of hundreds of thousands of ghosts in this gorge. She had relied on sucking those ghosts to improve her cultivation base. When I had seen her later, she had almost turned into a flood dragon. However, since then, I had sucked the army of hundreds of thousands of ghosts into the jade bracelet. I didn't know if Hui Hui was still here after that incident. With that thought in mind, I released my spiritual consciousness to sense around, but I couldn't sense Hui Hui's aura. When I had seen her, my cultivation base was too low, so I couldn't remember her aura. I couldn't sense her now, but it didn't mean that she wasn't here. While I was thinking about this, the serpent spirit suddenly stopped, and his face changed slightly. I didn't know what he had found, so I hurried to ask. The serpent spirit shook his head and said, I've sensed that Hui Hui's aura isn't in the previous cave. She seems to have left this place. I had already guessed this result, but when I heard the serpent spirit confirm it, my heart didn't waver. The fox girl was originally full of joy, but when she suddenly heard the news, her face instantly became gloomy and disappointed. After all, she had saved her life. Seeing her like this, I couldn't bear to see her like this, so I asked the serpent spirit if there was any other way to find Hui Hui. The serpent spirit thought for a while and said, I don't have a good way. I haven't had much contact with her all these years. But let's go to the cave where she used to live and have a look. Maybe we can find some clues. It seemed that this was the only way. I nodded and called the fox girl. Then, we followed the serpent spirit to the cave. On the way, we passed by a cliff. The serpent spirit stopped and told me that it had met Hui Hui here, who was covered in cuts and bruises. The serpent spirit didn't intend to pay attention to her, but they were of the same kind after all. He couldn't bear Hui Hui's pleas for help, so he took pity on her and saved her. After that, they stayed together for a few years. The snake spirit could not bear the loneliness and left this place to travel outside. In the end, not long after, his life was taken by someone. He hid in a Tao artifact compass and barely managed to keep his remnant soul from being destroyed. This was the first time I had heard the serpent spirit talk about his past. I was quite curious and was about to ask again, but he didn't say anything. He lifted his feet and walked forward. Soon, we arrived outside the cave where Hui had lived. I didn't need to go in to know that Hui wasn't inside. At this time, the cave was overgrown with weeds. There had obviously been no signs of activity for a long time. I followed the serpent spirit into the cave. It was empty inside. After walking around, the serpent spirit shook his head and told me that there was no longer Hui's aura here, and he didn't find any valuable clues. At this point, we had basically reached a dead end. The fox girl sighed and said helplessly, "There's nothing we can do if we can't find her. I can only go back and apologize to the high priest." I also sighed. I wanted to help the fox girl, but I didn't. I couldn't help but feel a little guilty. After staying in the cave for a while, the three of us raised our feet and left. However, we hadn't gone far when we sensed several waves of monster energy behind us. At this time, the three of us all had yang spirit cultivation, and our spiritual senses were quite similar. We stopped almost at the same time. I didn't need to turn around to know that there were 3 people chasing behind us. Their cultivation bases were all at the seal realm. Although their realms weren't high, their speed wasn't slow. When we turned around, they were already in front of us. The 3 people were all wrapped in gray robes. When they saw us turn around, they didn't say anything. They just looked at us with a pair of gray eyes, their pupils dilating. I didn't need to guess to know that they weren't humans. They were snake monsters. It was highly possible that they were from the Shenangjia's Lu tribe, which the fox girl had been searching for. I didn't expect that the people of the Lu tribe would take the initiative to come to our side. Thus, I politely asked for their identity to confirm it. The 3 people didn't answer my question, and their faces darkened. One of them grinned and said, "Little doll of the human race, you dare to trespass this place?" From what he said, it was clear that he hadn't seen through our cultivation base and thought that we were intruders. It was normal for the monster race to be hostile to humans. That was why I didn't mind and explained to them with a smile. I told them that we were representing the Green Hill Fox tribe and had come to visit the Shenangjia's Lu tribe. We had something important to discuss with them. After hearing me mention the Green Hill Fox tribe, the 3 people's faces relaxed a little. However, their hostility didn't disappear. At this moment, the fox girl walked forward and revealed her true body. They nodded, half believing and half doubting her words. However, they still didn't take us to the Lu tribe's residence. They told us to wait here and said that they would go back and report to the elders. Then, they would make a decision. In the current situation, the fox girl would be able to complete her task as long as the elder of the Lu tribe came. The snake spirit and I didn't need to participate in this. With that thought, I bid farewell to the fox girl. The fox girl naturally thanked me again and again. She told me that she would definitely bring my greetings to Yao Yao. After bidding farewell, I left with the snake spirit. It wasn't far from the half-year deadline. I'd better go to the fire god temple first to see if there were any unexpected situations. After all, the old man had already found this place. It was hard to guarantee that the elder wouldn't send someone else. Not long after we left, I felt a strong aura coming from behind me. It was most likely the elder of the Lu tribe. I didn't mind it and continued to walk forward. However, at that moment, the snake spirit suddenly stopped and his face darkened. I didn't know why, but I hurriedly asked. The snake spirit told me that he had sensed Hui's aura. I couldn't help but be surprised. Was the elder of the Lu tribe Hui? Before I could ask, the snake spirit suddenly turned around and ran in the previous direction. This action made me feel a little strange. Just now, in the Xiape Gorge, The snake spirit's behavior showed that he didn't care about Hui Hui. Why was he so anxious now? Although I felt strange, I was also worried about the snake spirit. I didn't have time to think and quickly followed him. When we returned to the previous place, the fox girl was standing in front of a man in black, talking about something. This man in black should be the elder of the Lu tribe, but his whole body was wrapped in black, so I couldn't see his appearance. However, from his figure, it was obvious that he was a man. He didn't look like Hui Hui. Before I could react, the snake spirit had already rushed forward and grabbed the collar of the man in black, shouting, "What did you do to Hui Hui?" In the face of this sudden change, the man in black didn't show the slightest fear. He coldly snorted at the snake spirit. "Where did this little baby come from? You don't know life from death." As he spoke, black smoke appeared in his hands out of thin air, and he fiercely slapped the snake spirit. Chapter 851. Judging from the snake spirit's behavior, this Lu tribe elder was obviously related to Hui Hui's disappearance. No wonder he was so angry. While I was thinking, the black-clothed man's palm had already landed on the snake spirit's body. If it was an ordinary person, a young god celestial master would be able to kill him with one blow. Even if it was someone with the same cultivation level, they would be seriously injured if they were caught off guard. However, the snake spirit not only had the cultivation level of a young god celestial master, but it had also transformed into a real dragon. It wasn't difficult for a scale worm to become a young god celestial master. As long as it had good cultivation talent and suitable cultivation techniques, it could become a young god in a few hundred years. However, transforming into a real dragon didn't depend on cultivation level. It was more important to have bloodline and opportunity. The snake spirit's original body was a dragon, so its bloodline was needless to say. I was also a key part of Emperor Ku's thousands of years of plan. The snake spirit often accompanied me, so there was no need to mention the opportunity. Moreover, according to the snake spirit's character, it wouldn't make a move unless it could deal with it easily. Therefore, I wasn't worried that the black-clothed man's attack would hurt the snake spirit. On the contrary, I was afraid that the snake spirit would transform into its original body and swallow the black-clothed man. At that time, the fact that the snake spirit had transformed into a real dragon couldn't be hidden anymore. Kunlun was an immortal realm. If a real dragon could enter Kunlun, there must be something special about it, apart from the consideration of cultivation level. We were now in the Lu tribe's territory. If they found out that the snake spirit had transformed into a real dragon, they might find a way to keep him here. In addition, the blood of a real dragon was an item of extreme yang. It was even more coveted than a real dragon's vein. If the snake spirit handled things a little differently, it would not only attract the attention of the Lu tribe, but it would also become the target of all the cultivators in the world. When we left Kunlun Mountain, I realized this problem. That was why I told the snake spirit not to reveal its original body. However, I didn't tell him the reason at that time. With his character, I was afraid that it would cause him to panic. Otherwise, when I really needed him, he would be afraid and would delay things. I stopped thinking about this matter and began to circulate my wizard chi. I planned to immediately set up a barrier here to isolate the real dragon's aura when the snake spirit transformed into its original body. However, as soon as the wizard chi flowed to his hands, the snake spirit retreated a few steps. However, his expression was the same as usual, so he should not have been injured. Fortunately, he did not transform into his original form because of this, which was somewhat not in line with the snake spirit's style. However, just as I was feeling confused, the spirit snake muttered. As expected. From the looks of it, he seemed to have intentionally offended the black-clothed man. He probably wanted to test or confirm the guess in his heart. I have a whole new level of respect for him for being able to have such a calm mind. When the black-clothed man saw that he couldn't injure the snake spirit, he didn't continue to attack. Instead, he stared at the snake spirit. I couldn't see his face, so I didn't know what he was thinking. Seeing this, I couldn't suppress the curiosity in my heart anymore. I hurriedly went next to the spirit snake and asked what it had sensed. The snake spirit didn't ignore me as it had before. Instead, it told me that it had sensed Hui's blood essence in this person. According to him, he and Hui had been together for 100 years. Although they weren't husband and wife in name, they were husband and wife. So, the snake spirit was very sensitive about Hui. Even a piece of Hui's scale couldn't escape his perception. He had just sensed Hui's aura, but when he saw this man, he had an idea. He had to prove it by provoking him. After listening to the snake spirit's words, I understood. I had to say that the snake spirit's way of dealing with this matter was reliable. Since Hui's Tian had been absorbed by this man, something must have happened to Hui. Right now, we should go to the Lu tribe to investigate. However, the snake spirit had questioned the black-clothed man. He must have been alerted and wouldn't let us enter the Lu tribe. Even so, we might as well be tough and force these people to lead us into the Lu tribe. But then, we would have to shed all pretense of cordiality with the Lu tribe. This would put the fox girl in a difficult position. However, this was the worst-case scenario. After all, we didn't know the inside story. If Hui's bloodline was special like Yao Yao's, we might not know if she took the initiative to offer her Tian's Tian blood. Thinking of this, I told the snake spirit what I was thinking. This matter was related to Hui, so I had to let the snake spirit handle it himself. After listening to me, he didn't immediately respond. Instead, he lowered his head and pondered. He seemed to be weighing the pros and cons. Seeing this, I didn't disturb him. Instead, I asked the fox girl next to me in a low voice if I had informed them. If it was done, we could return. We didn't need to stay here any longer. Of course, I wanted to send her away. Once the snake spirit decided to use tough methods, the people of the Lu tribe wouldn't be his match. At that time, the fox girl would inevitably be involved. I knew that because of my identity, the fox girl wouldn't interfere in this matter. However, I was afraid that the Lu tribe would blame this matter on the Qingqiu tribe. The two tribes would inevitably become estranged. The final negotiation would also be affected. I was afraid that it would ruin Yao Yao's plan. I didn't know if the fox girl could understand the situation in front of her. After listening to my words, she didn't immediately respond. After thinking for a while, she nodded and excused herself. After she left, I could completely relax. No matter what choice the snake spirit made, I wouldn't let today's matter go. After a while, I finally received the snake spirit's reply. He told me that he planned to interrogate the man in black and ask him about Hui's current situation first. His thoughts were calm and clear. He had indeed considered it carefully. Since that was the case, I could only respect his choice and indicate that he would take the lead in this matter. Seeing that I had agreed, the snake spirit's aura surged and emitted a wave of pressure. At that moment, the three people behind the man in black were already kneeling on the ground. The man in black was trying his best to resist, but his body was also trembling. Dragons were the best of the scaled worms. Their natural restraints were difficult for the snake monsters to resist. Then, the snake spirit asked where Hui was and if she was okay. Due to the strong pressure emitted by the snake spirit, the three people kneeling on the ground couldn't speak. However, the man in black in front of me should be able to speak, but he didn't respond. Seeing this, the snake spirit wasn't in a hurry. Instead, it raised its aura again, and the pressure on its body became stronger. At that moment, the three people who were kneeling on the ground couldn't support themselves anymore. They all fell to the ground and kept twitching. The man in black also knelt on one knee. His neck was resisting and he let out a low roar. The snake spirit spoke again, but the man in black still kept his mouth shut and didn't respond. Seeing this, I already had some ideas in my mind. It seemed that the possibility of Hui taking the initiative to offer her blood was very small. I was afraid that she had already been persecuted. The snake spirit didn't continue to raise its aura since it didn't get a response. Instead, it was thinking about something like me. After a while, it moved and lifted one of the people on the ground. Then, it erased the pressure on him and repeated the previous words, indicating that the person should tell me the details. After the pressure was removed, the person's body softened. He seemed to be exhausted. Since he had already tasted the snake spirit's tricks, he naturally didn't dare to hide anything. He immediately told the snake spirit that Hui was in the Lu family's palace. As for whether she was safe or not, he didn't know. The person's eyes were filled with fear, and he didn't hide his words. It was obvious that he wasn't lying. In that case, Hui was most likely trapped in the Lu family's palace. However, the snake monster's status was low, so he couldn't know the inside story. It seemed that I had to ask the man in black if I wanted to know the details. The spirit snake seemed to understand what I was thinking. He casually threw the snake monster aside. Then, he lifted the black-clothed man and coldly said, "If you don't tell me the details, I will kill you immediately." As he spoke, his eyes were filled with murderous intent. I hadn't seen him like this since he had mistakenly entered the ancient battlefield in Chio's tomb. The snake spirit had lost its mind and turned into a dragon. Even so, the man in black still refused to speak. This completely angered the snake spirit. He roared and his aura increased. When I saw this, I was stunned. If I let him increase his aura, I was afraid that he wouldn't be able to hide the true dragon's aura in his body. Thinking of this, I immediately set up a barrier of witchcraft energy around us and stopped the snake spirit. However, the snake spirit was so enraged that he didn't care about my words at all. The more he behaved like this, the more worried I was. Back then, even enlightened Master Guan's array formation was unable to isolate the aura of the demon core. The aura of the true dragon was comparable to the aura of the demon core. How could my simple spiritual energy barrier completely isolate the aura of the true dragon, which was the purest form of Yang? Just as I was at a loss, the snake spirit's aura suddenly stopped. I was suspicious and looked up. I found that his body was trembling and his face was pale. He seemed to be exhausted. However, he wasn't injured, and the man in black didn't do anything. Why did he look like this? After thinking about it carefully, I guessed that since the snake spirit had turned into a true dragon and advanced to the Yang God realm, he had neglected his cultivation and his realm was unstable. He had forcefully increased his aura several times, which had consumed a lot of his strength. However, seeing him like this made me relax. I couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. I moved closer to the snake spirit and patted his shoulder, asking him to retract his aura to preserve his strength. Perhaps he knew that he couldn't hold on any longer, so he retracted his aura. His complexion looked better. Chapter 852. Perhaps he thought that he had the cultivation of a Yang God celestial master. Even if we killed him in anger, as long as his Yang God was not destroyed, he could find a new body to resurrect. Little did he know that I had already predicted his thoughts. When he heard what I said, his expression changed drastically. He stood there in silence, as if he was weighing the pros and cons in his heart. It could be seen that Hui's matter was very important to the Lu clan. It was enough to make the elder in black robe try his best to keep it a secret. However, after a while, the elder in black robe relaxed and sighed softly. He seemed to know that he was at a complete disadvantage and did not have the capital to negotiate with us. Helpless, he could only choose to compromise and tell us the details. According to him, Hui was indeed under house arrest in the Lu clan's palace. Her life was not in danger yet, but with her current condition, she would definitely die within a month. Hearing this, the snake spirit was furious. He walked to the elder in black robe and lifted him up. He asked them what they had done to Hui Hui. Since the elder in black robe had chosen to speak, he naturally would not hide anything. I learned from him that Hui Hui's bloodline was very special. Her blood contained a powerful force. In addition, Hui Hui was about to transform into a Jiao. This kind of bloodline talent was even more coveted. It had been thousands of years since a member of the Lu clan had been able to successfully transform into a dragon. Now that a person with such a good bloodline like Hui Hui had suddenly appeared, the Lu clan's royal family would naturally not let her go easily. Speaking of this, I roughly understood. Hui Hui was the same as Yao Yao back then. They both had a bloodline that had not been seen in the clan for thousands of years. However, the difference between the two was that the Qing Qiu clan had elected Yao Yao as their leader to lead them back to the peak, while the Lu clan's royal family coveted Hui Hui's bloodline talent and wanted to take it for themselves. What puzzled me was that they had both lost their blood, but why was Yao Yao safe and sound? Thinking of this, I suddenly realized that it might have something to do with the Fox King's blood that Yao Yao had obtained when she had advanced to become a Seal Celestial Master. However, what made me even more curious was that Hui Hui was a member of the Lu clan. The Lu clan should have long known about the abnormality of her bloodline talent. Why did the elder in black robes say that he had accidentally learned of it? Thinking about this, I asked about the doubts in my heart. I wanted to find an answer from the black-clothed elder. When he heard my question, he didn't dare to deny it. He quickly told me that the Lu family had a strict hierarchy. The members of the family were ranked according to their cultivation talents. When the children and grandchildren were born, their cultivation talents would be tested. Hui Hui was at the bottom of the family. A few hundred years ago, she had run away to avoid her marriage. However, when she returned to the family a few years ago, she caught the attention of the royal family. If it weren't for the fact that she had a relative who was still alive, she would have been treated as an alien. However, the black-clothed elder did not know why she had become like this in these hundreds of years. In this way, Hui Hui must have had a fortuitous encounter to possess her current natural talent. However, the last time we saw her, she already showed signs of transforming into a flood dragon. At that time, her bloodline talent had already changed greatly. As such, this matter must have happened some time ago. The snake spirit and Hui Hui had lived together for 100 years, so perhaps he should know about this. Thinking so, I turned to look at the snake spirit. He might have understood the meaning in my eyes, but he looked confused, indicating that he didn't know about this matter. Perhaps Hui Hui had some fortuitous encounter in the 100 years after he left. In this way it was possible. Then, the snake spirit gestured for the black-clothed elder to lead the way. It seemed that he planned to go to the Lu family palace to rescue Hui Hui. However, this matter could not be so impatient. The black-clothed elder in front of me was a Yang God Celestial Master and an elder of the Lu family. Imagine that an elder was sent to be in charge of peripheral protection. It could be imagined that his strength was at the bottom of the list. Based on the situation of the Qingqiu family, the cultivation of the highest ruler of the Lu family was at least at the peak of Yang God. Of course, this was just my guess. We had not yet reached the Lu family's territory, so we could take this opportunity to understand the internal situation so that we could prepare early. Otherwise, if this black-clothed elder were to secretly inform them and let them be on guard, wouldn't we be walking right into a trap then? Although the snake spirit and I were strong, it was difficult for the two of us to fight against so many people. Moreover, we had never been to the Lu family's territory, so we didn't know what they had planned. At that time, not only would we not be able to rescue Hui Hui, but we would also be trapped in a quagmire. Thinking of this, I interrupted the snake spirit's words and called him aside to tell him what I was thinking. After listening to me, the snake spirit frowned and thought for a while. He sighed and said, "Why don't we disguise as them and sneak in? What do you think?" After listening to the snake spirit's idea, I did not rush to respond. Instead, I drove the 3 snake monsters away, leaving only the black-clothed elder. At this time, my purpose was very clear. It was useless for the 3 of them to stay here. If we killed them, it would arouse the suspicion of the Liu family. Moreover, they were not the mastermind of this matter, nor did they get any benefits. They did not touch the core of the matter, so we had no reason to kill them. More importantly, we could not delay this trip for too long. I could not miss the day of meeting with Tao Wu. The 3 of them were too low in status, so they could not easily get close to the Liu family palace. On the contrary, if we let them go, they would provide us with a good cover. The snake spirit's previous words reminded me that we could indeed disguise as the people of the Liu family. However, the aura on our bodies was too different from that of the Liu family, so we had to prepare carefully. Thinking of this, I summoned Tong Tong and handed the jade bracelet to her. She looked at me with a puzzled expression, obviously not understanding what I meant. Then, I whispered to her to use the jade bracelet to absorb all of the monster aura in the black-clothed elder's body into the jade bracelet. The most crucial step for us to disguise as the people of the Liu family was the monster aura in the black-clothed elder's body. As for his appearance, there was no need to worry too much. The reason why the black-clothed elder was wrapped in a long robe was that he didn't want others to know his appearance. This was the most advantageous condition for us. After listening to my words, Tong Tong and the snake spirit were enlightened and exclaimed in understanding. I didn't hide my words, so the black-clothed elder naturally heard everything. However, he was already a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Facing the 3 of us, he couldn't resist at all. However, he didn't lose the arrogance of an elder of the Liu family. He didn't beg for mercy, which made me admire him a lot. Since the matter had been explained, we didn't delay any further. I was afraid that the people who had left earlier would quickly find help to rescue him. As such, I waved my hand to set up a witchcraft barrier around us. On the one hand, it prevented the snake spirit's aura from spreading, and on the other hand, it was convenient to collect the black-clothed elder's monster aura. After that, I nodded at the snake spirit, indicating that we could begin. After receiving the order, the snake spirit didn't hesitate. Its aura suddenly increased, pressing the black-clothed elder to kneel on the ground. His body trembled violently. Then, I placed both of my hands on his forehead, intending to extract his young spirit. His current appearance made me feel pity for him. This was the first time I had seen a young god celestial master not resist at the moment of life and death. However, it was all because of the snake spirit's true dragon's aura. However, this pressure was effective against scale worms of the same or lower cultivation level. If their cultivation level was higher, I was afraid that there wouldn't be such a strong reaction. However, pity was pity. If I wanted to successfully rescue Hui Hui, I had to use this method. With this thought in mind, I put aside the distracting thoughts in my mind. The Taoist qi in my body was activated to the extreme, and my hands formed sword fingers to extract the black-clothed elder's young spirit from his body bit by bit. When a person was about to die, they would naturally fight for it out of instinct. However, due to the tyrannical pressure of the snake spirit's true dragon, the black-clothed elder couldn't resist it after several painful wails. The young spirit in his life palace was completely extracted by me. The moment the young spirit left his body, I realized that the black-clothed elder's appearance was really not flattering. He had triangular eyes on his triangular face. No wonder he had hidden his appearance. However, the more he did this, the more I felt that it would work. After the young spirit left his body, thick black smoke was emitted from his body. This black smoke was monster aura. Earlier, I had told Tong Tong about this matter. Naturally, she wouldn't neglect it. Her hands immediately produced pure yin qi, which surrounded the black smoke. Then, the surrounding yin qi continued to shrink, gathering the black smoke into a ball and returning it to the jade bracelet. After Tong Tong was done, the black-clothed elder's body turned into a giant black python that curled up into a ball. There was no trace of vitality. Seeing this, I immediately retracted my attention and quickly used the soul-searching technique to transfer all the memories of the black-clothed elder's young spirit to my body for my use. After this matter was over, there was no need for the black-clothed elder's young spirit to exist anymore. Then, I took out the Xianyuan sword from my mouth. When the Xianyuan sword was full of Taoist qi, the 9 stars heavenly dipper under my feet fell at the same time and slashed at the black-clothed elder's yang spirit. Under the snake spirit's true dragon pressure, the yang spirit's strength was greatly reduced. It was unable to withstand the sword energy that was full of Taoist qi. In the blink of an eye, the Xianyuan sword energy fell on the celestial master's yang spirit. When the two collided, there was no ripple. In less than a few seconds, the celestial master's yang spirit completely disappeared from the world. After doing this, I didn't stop there. I used the celestial master's word formula to explode the giant black python, turning it into smoke and dust that scattered with the wind. This wasn't the time to relax. I hurried to ask the snake spirit to fly back to my back. Then, I asked Tong Tong to return to the jade bracelet. Then, I put on the black robe on the ground. I whispered to Tong Tong to release some of the monster aura from the jade bracelet, covering my body. I retracted the witchcraft energy barrier around me and sensed for a while. After confirming that there were no flaws, I exhaled and planned to go to the Lu family immediately. Chapter 853. With my current strength, even if their cultivation was slightly higher than mine, they might not be a match for me if we were to fight. Scale insects and beasts were the same as Een soul cultivators. Their strength was generally slightly lower than human cultivators of the same realm, so I didn't care too much. Instead, I was happy. Now that I was disguised as the Lu clan elder, I didn't know if there were any flaws. These Lu clan people could verify it. If they couldn't pass off the fake as the real one, I would have room to adjust. While I was in deep thought, a few people landed in front of me. The leader was wearing a purple robe. His triangular eyes revealed his crafty nature, and he wore a smile on his white-bearded face. After he landed, he didn't say anything, but looked around as if he was looking for me and the snake spirit. However, I had already changed into the appearance of the black-clothed elder, and the snake spirit had returned to my back. Naturally, he wouldn't know our whereabouts. After patrolling for a while, he suddenly turned to look at the 3 people behind him and angrily rebuked, "Didn't you say that the 7th elder was detained here?" After I searched through the black-clothed elder's memory, I found out that the purple-clothed elder was also an elder of the Lu clan. He was older than the black-clothed elder, and ranked 5th among the elders. He was a young god celestial master at the middle stage. This person was known for being vicious and ruthless. He was also very scheming, so he didn't get along well with the black-clothed elder. However, I didn't know why he had come to rescue the black-clothed elder. After thinking for a while, I understood. The 5th elder and the black-clothed elder were brothers born from the same mother. However, the black-clothed elder's cultivation talent was slightly inferior, and because of his extremely ugly appearance, he was sent to guard the Lu clan's periphery. The 5th elder, on the other hand, was very talented and had a high status in the clan. However, for some reason, when Hui Hui's blood was distributed, the 5th elder didn't receive it. Instead, the black-clothed elder, who was inferior to him in every aspect, was rewarded. This made the 5th elder very dissatisfied. However, this was the decision of the Snake King, and the 5th elder didn't dare to disobey the Snake King. He could only secretly make things difficult for the black-clothed elder, looking for an opportunity to snatch Hui Hui's blood. In that case, he had come for this. After understanding the situation, I was secretly delighted. If the relationship between the 5th elder and the black-clothed elder was extremely good, and they were very close, perhaps they would discover some abnormalities. The current situation was perfect. They normally didn't get along with each other. Even if they discovered some small problems, they wouldn't have the heart to ask about it. This gave me a chance to take advantage of the situation. Just like that, I didn't bother with them and headed towards the Liu family. I hadn't gone far when the man caught up with me. He stood beside me and asked me what had just happened. Hearing his question, I didn't panic. After thinking for a while, I ignored him. In any case, these two brothers didn't get along with each other, so it was reasonable for me to ignore him. After all, I was just an impersonator. The more I spoke, the more mistakes I would make. Not saying anything would actually make me look more real. As I had thought, the fifth brother didn't suspect anything when he saw that I didn't pay attention to him. His expression became gloomy, as if he didn't have the mood to investigate any further. He quickly flew in the direction of the Liu family. I had planned to follow him, but after thinking about it, I realized that if I flew, I would inevitably use my cultivation. If he detected me, it would be very bad. So, I chose to walk slowly. After walking for 4 hours, I finally arrived at the Liu family's village. Along the way, I kept searching for the situation of the Liu family in my mind. According to the black-clothed elder's memory, there were 7 elders in the Liu family, all of whom had the cultivation of Yang God's celestial master. The black-clothed elder was ranked at the bottom, while the other 6 were above the middle stage of Yang God. These elders were all members of the Liu family's royal family. I had already expected this when he had mentioned Hui Hui's blood. However, in addition to this, I also learned a piece of news that shocked me. The current Snake King of the Liu family had the cultivation of Chongju. Although he hadn't transformed into a real dragon, his strength was enough to frighten people. It seemed that I had to be more careful in this operation. After thinking about it, I decided to avoid meeting the Snake King as much as possible in order to avoid being detected. It had been less than 3 days since Swan had appeared, and this place was a dangerous place. I couldn't stay here for long. With this thought in mind, I went directly to the Liu family's palace. I planned to see Hui first and investigate the situation. After a quarter of an hour, I arrived at the dungeon where Hui was being held. The 2 black-armored young men guarding the door had the cultivation of Shuyao. When they saw me, they quickly came over and bowed to me. Then, they asked me why I had come here. Although the black-clothed elder wasn't very popular after the other elders, his status was still high in the eyes of ordinary people. I didn't pay attention to them and just waved my hand, indicating that they should lead the way. Unexpectedly, the 2 black-armored young men bowed again and told me that Hui was no longer in the dungeon. Earlier, the Snake King had sent someone to take her away. I was stunned and asked them if they knew where Hui had been taken. The 2 of them shook their heads, indicating that they had no right to ask about Hui's affairs. As such, it was a little troublesome. I could only retreat from the dungeon. After thinking for a while on the way, I got a useful clue from the black-clothed elder's memory. Previously, the Snake King would always bring Hui to a mysterious valley. No one was allowed to enter that place except for the Snake King. Every time he brought Hui there, the Snake King would take a drop of Hui's blood essence. His temperament was also different from before. It seemed that the Snake King had ordered people to take Hui away to that mysterious valley. After understanding the situation, I thought for a while and rushed to the valley. When I arrived, I saw 5 or 6 white-haired old men standing outside the valley. They wore robes of different colors, and one of them was the 5th elder who had come to rescue Hui. According to the black-clothed elder's memory, these people were the other 6 elders. Every time the Snake King came out, he would distribute the blood essence he had obtained here. However, the blood essence in Hui's body was too powerful. If it was given to these elders, not only would it not help them improve their cultivation, but it would also backfire on them. For this reason, every time the Snake King got the blood essence, He would suck a part of it and then divide the rest into 3 parts for the other 3. However, these 3 people didn't take turns. It was all according to the Snake King's preference. Therefore, every time the Snake King entered the valley, several elders would gather there, hoping that they could be the lucky ones. Although these 7 elders appeared to be in harmony on the surface, they had secretly drawn in their clansmen and divided their forces. However, due to the Snake King's coercion, they didn't dare to fight openly. Thinking to this point, I roughly swept a glance at the crowd behind me. I already had a rough understanding of the situation of these people. The first one to notice me was the 5th elder. He shouted from afar, "Old 7, on the day the king distributed the blood essence, you were so slack. If you had come a little later, today's matter would have nothing to do with you." As he spoke, although the 5th elder had a smile on his face, he didn't hide the hostility and disgust in his eyes. It was obvious that he still held a grudge against the black-clothed elder for taking the blood essence. I knew that there was discord between them, so I didn't pay attention to it. I walked into the crowd and greeted the other elders one by one. Then I stood aside. At this moment, the elders were all looking in the direction of the valley, but they didn't talk to each other. When the 5th elder saw that I didn't respond to him, he didn't speak anymore. His expression became more and more anxious. It was obvious that he was looking forward to Hui Hui's blood essence. After about an hour, a figure finally appeared in the valley. It was a man in a yellow robe. He was carrying a woman in ragged clothes on his shoulder. From afar, I could feel that the woman's aura was very weak. She must have suffered a lot of injuries. It wasn't difficult to guess the identity of these 2 people. The woman on his shoulder was naturally Hui Hui, and the man in the golden robe must be the Snake King. What surprised me was that the Snake King looked very young. Based on his appearance, he seemed to be about the same age as me. I didn't know if he was like this or if he was deliberately maintaining his youthful appearance. At this moment, I suddenly felt a chill on my back. The snake spirit must have sensed Hui Hui's aura and wanted to come out. There were 6 Yang God celestial masters here, and one of them was even a Yang God. Although the snake spirit had turned into a real dragon, his cultivation was only at the early stage of Yang God. The pressure of his real dragon could intimidate the elders, but it was useless against the Snake King. If he appeared rashly, not only would he not be able to take Hui Hui away, but we would also be trapped in a quagmire. With this thought in mind, I whispered my thoughts to the snake spirit. After listening to me, he calmed down and didn't make any unusual movements. After comforting the snake spirit, a voice suddenly came from the crowd. "Old 7, what are you doing? Why don't you greet the Snake King?" Hearing this, I came back to my senses and looked forward. The person who had spoken was the 5th elder. At this moment, several elders were kneeling in front of the Snake King. Just now, I was so focused on comforting the snake spirit that I didn't notice their actions. It was obvious that the 5th elder had found an opportunity to quickly scold them. I naturally understood what he was thinking. He just wanted to take the opportunity to make me punish the Snake King and lose a competitor. After hearing his voice, the elders who were kneeling down turned to look at me. Even the Snake King, who was approaching, looked a little displeased. Only then did I react. The Liu family had a strict hierarchy, and there were many relative etiquettes. It was disrespectful for me to not kneel in front of the Snake King. It was a small matter if I couldn't get Hui Hui's blood essence, but if the Snake King noticed me and discovered my fake identity, it would be difficult to clean up the mess. I couldn't help but feel nervous. I gritted my teeth and thought about it. A real man should know when to yield and when to stand tall. It was just kneeling. In order to save Hui Hui, it was okay to suffer a little. With this thought in mind, I still knelt. Seeing this, the Snake King calmed down and said faintly, "I heard that a messenger of the Qingqiu clan came today, and you were the one who received him. I wonder what Chief Qingqiu has to tell me." Hearing this, I let out a long breath and told the Snake King the news I had heard from the Fox Girl. After listening to me, there was no expression on his face. He just nodded slightly and muttered, "It seems that we have to hurry up." I didn't know what he meant by that, but after he finished speaking, he glanced at Hui Hui on the ground. Presumably, he was referring to the matter of extracting Hui Hui's blood essence. In that case, I had to save Hui Hui as soon as possible. While I was thinking, the Snake King spoke again. "You did a good job in receiving the messenger today, so I won't punish you. I'm a little tired, so I'll let you bring this girl back." Then, the Snake King ignored the crowd and turned around, disappearing on the spot. However, after he left, the people in front of me looked confused. They must be wondering why the Snake King didn't give them the blood essence today. Fortunately, these people weren't inflexible. They turned around and chased after the Snake King. Chapter 854. The fifth elder wasn't a good person. Since he was staring at Hui Hui, he didn't have a good plan. I planned to wait until the Serpent King's aura completely disappeared. I would go there and take Hui Hui away. Then, I would find a chance to leave the Lu family. I had this thought in my mind, but before the Snake King's aura had completely disappeared, before I could take any action, the fifth elder suddenly pounced forward. He lifted Hui Hui with one hand and flew towards the direction of the valley. I knew it wasn't good. I didn't care if my aura would leak or not. I ran as fast as the wind and chased after him. I didn't expect that I would be blocked by a barrier when I was about to pass the valley. From the aura I sensed, if I wanted to get through the barrier, I would have to use monster energy. There was monster energy in the jade bracelet, and my body was also shrouded in thick monster energy. However, I didn't have the power to control it. Fortunately, there were no Lu members guarding the barrier. I directly summoned the Serpent Spirit and asked him if he could open the barrier. Although the Serpent Spirit's original form was also a snake, he had a miraculous destiny. He had been born from the monster clan. When I first saw him, he was surrounded by Yin energy instead of monster chi. Now that he had turned into a real dragon, he didn't have a single wisp of monster chi around him. He pondered for a while and asked me for the jade bracelet. Then, he summoned his eyes to release the monster chi from the bracelet. He controlled the monster chi to attack the barrier in front of him. At first, the monster energy moved very slowly. However, when it approached the barrier, the Serpent Spirit roared. The monster energy sped up and hit the barrier in the blink of an eye. At the moment of impact, the barrier rippled violently. Then, the center of the barrier was torn open, leaving a big hole that was big enough for 4 or 5 people to pass through. I was happy and hurried to get through the hole. The Serpent Spirit followed me. I wanted to call the Serpent Spirit to return to me, but he didn't stop. He continued to chase after the fifth elder. I hesitated for a while but decided to follow him. I didn't let the Serpent Spirit come out because I was afraid that he would get anxious. If he didn't agree with me, he would start a massacre. I was afraid he wouldn't be able to find Hui Hui. Now that we had found Hui Hui, it was okay to let the Serpent Spirit come out. The two of us chased for a few kilometers, but the aura of the fifth elder and Hui Hui suddenly disappeared. The valley in front of us was surrounded by a dense forest, and we couldn't find the fifth elder. Moreover, he was at the intermediate stage of Yang spirit realm. I couldn't sense him. While I was frowning, there was a slight explosion in the forest in the distance. The snake spirit and I exchanged looks. Then, we lifted our feet and dashed toward the source of the sound. The Serpent Spirit and the Serpent Spirit. The Serpent Spirit and the Serpent Spirit, Hui Hui, Elder, and Hui Hui. He, the Serpent Spirit, he. I, Elder, a Wu. The stone pillars were engraved with dragon patterns. Hui Hui was placed in the middle of the 9 dragon pillars, while the fifth elder was sitting under the dragon pillar with his eyes closed. His mouth was moving slightly, as if he was chanting something. Based on the current situation, it was obvious that there was some sort of formation between the 9 pillars with dragon tattoos carved on them. Furthermore, it seemed like the 5th elder was activating this formation. I couldn't tell what the function of the formation was just by looking at it, but no matter what it was, it couldn't be a good thing for Hui, who was in the middle of the formation. The serpent spirit seemed to be aware of this. He looked up to the sky and roared. Then, he turned into a real dragon. He moved so fast that I didn't have time to stop him. By the time I reacted, he had already rushed toward the 5th elder, and his huge dragon mouth was about to fall on the serpent spirit's body. However, the 5th elder was at the intermediate stage of Yang spirit realm. He was suddenly attacked. He immediately bowed and stood up. As he retreated, he looked at the serpent spirit. When he saw the serpent spirit's appearance, he was shocked and panicked. Then, he suddenly became happy. After avoiding the serpent spirit's attack, he stood in the distance and stared at the serpent spirit. I didn't know what he was thinking. The serpent spirit was obviously angrier after its attack failed. It swept its tail and hit the 5th elder again. The dragon tail swayed very quickly. In addition, the 5th elder didn't know what he was thinking. He was hit by the serpent spirit and was thrown far away. He fell to the ground. However, the 5th elder was not an ordinary person. This attack didn't seriously injure him. Instead, it aroused his courage. The next second, the momentum around his body surged. Cyan demon chi covered his whole body. He continued to stare at the serpent spirit. His triangular eyes were filled with endless greed. He didn't hide his eyes at all. Obviously, he was coveting the serpent spirit. After thinking about it for a while, I understood that he had brought Hui here because he coveted the remaining 7 drops of blood in her body. As a member of the Lu clan, the ultimate purpose of obtaining Hui's blood and improving his cultivation was not to transform into a dragon. Now that he had encountered the serpent spirit, he could see that the serpent spirit had transformed into a real dragon. However, its cultivation base was only at the Yang spirit realm. If it swallowed the serpent spirit, it was possible for it to cross the chasm. How could it not be happy? I didn't care about his thoughts. While the serpent spirit was fighting with him, I flew to Hui, who was lying in the middle of the dragon pillar. Soon, I landed next to her. I didn't hurry to take her away. Instead, I put my hands on her abdomen to check her injury. Soon, I furrowed my brow. Hui's injury was much more serious than I had imagined. The monster race and the human race had different structures, and their spiritual energy was also different. I could check her situation, but I couldn't treat her. The only thing I could do now was to take her away from here as soon as possible and discuss with the serpent spirit how to treat her. After taking Hui away from the dragon pillar formation, the serpent spirit was still entangled with the 5th elder. It would be difficult for it to get away in a short time. Moreover, the serpent spirit's roar was very loud. It might have alerted the Lu clan. If we continued in this stalemate, it would be difficult for us to get away when the Lu clan heard the commotion and rushed over. With that in mind, I summoned Tong Tong and asked her to take good care of Hui. I quickly took out the armor remodeling sword and stepped on the 9-star heavenly dipper. When my last step landed, the abundant armor remodeling sword energy slashed at the 5th elder and joined the battle. Seeing the armor remodeling sword, the serpent spirit turned its body and moved out of the way. Then, it swung its dragon claw at the 5th elder's body. At that moment, the 5th elder was pincered by me and the serpent spirit, so he couldn't move. In the blink of an eye, he roared angrily and turned into a giant green python. Under the illumination of the thick sword energy, the green scales looked colorful. It stood in the same place, as if it didn't care about the armor remodeling sword energy and the dragon claw. It didn't even try to dodge. Very quickly, the dragon claw and the armor remodeling sword energy hit the green python's body at the same time. In an instant, a loud explosion resounded through the forest and stirred up the dust on the ground. After a few seconds, the forest returned to peace and the dust that was stirred up also dissipated. I then saw the green python's appearance clearly. It stood firmly in the same place and didn't move at all. The scales on its body weren't damaged at all. Even though I had expected it when I saw that it didn't try to dodge, I was still shocked when I saw that it was unharmed. I didn't think that the green python's scales would be so indestructible. I took a deep breath. After I had advanced to the sun god realm, the armor remodeling sword energy was much weaker to me. After all, it was just a normal sword. It was almost impossible to kill a sun god celestial master with it. Thus, I kept the armor remodeling sword and spat out the Xian Yuan sword from my mouth. The moment the Xian Yuan sword appeared, I noticed that the green python's body moved back a little. It was probably startled by the divine weapon's aura. In the next second, the green python angrily roared at me, "Audacious human, you dare to kill my Lu tribe's elder." The technique that I had used just now wasn't the Lu tribe's technique. Combined with what had happened outside the Lu tribe, it wasn't hard to see that I was a human. Since he had already seen through me, there was no need for me to hide it. I casually replied, "Didn't you always want to find a chance to kill your seventh brother? I have already helped you get rid of the pain in your heart. Why are you still so angry?" My tone was slightly mocking. The fifth elder seemed to think that I had seen through him. The killing intent in his eyes intensified. He opened his bloody mouth and pounced towards me. Unexpectedly, with his huge body, his speed wasn't any slower than mine. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of me. At that moment, I didn't dare to hesitate. I pushed off the ground and jumped to the side to avoid the attack. The green python's attack didn't succeed. The huge snake head fiercely smashed into the ground. The ground where it had been previously was splashed with mud and soil, and it sank a few meters. Before I could steady myself, the snake head changed direction and pounced towards me again. It didn't slow down at all. I had no choice but to leap into the air to avoid the attack again. However, this time, I didn't completely dodge. The Taoist qi in my body circulated crazily and continuously sent it into the Xian Yuan sword. At the same time, the Xian Yuan sword was filled with Taoist qi. After I landed on the ground and stabilized my body, I waved my hand and the Xian Yuan sword qi slashed towards the green python's back. The green python seemed to realize that it couldn't resist the Xian Yuan sword qi. It hastily transformed into its human form. The Xian Yuan sword qi instantly lost its target. In the blink of an eye, it slashed through the air. However, the dense forest behind the fifth elder wasn't spared. It was a complete mess a few hundred meters away. Chapter 855. After dodging my attack, the fifth elder glared at me. Then, he flew toward the serpent spirit in the air. Since his action was too sudden, the serpent spirit didn't react and landed on his back. After he reacted, the serpent spirit turned its head and wanted to bite him. However, the fifth elder's strength wasn't ordinary. He controlled his body and suppressed the serpent spirit at the same time. The serpent spirit couldn't get rid of him. However, his behavior puzzled me, so I didn't rush to attack him. Instead, I focused my attention on his movement. After a while, he stopped pestering the serpent spirit and flew toward the 9 dragon pillars. After being harassed by him, the serpent spirit's eyes were filled with anger. It twisted its body and chased after him. Seeing this, I furrowed my brows and had a bad premonition. Sure enough, after the fifth elder flew toward the 9 dragon pillars, he stopped. He seemed to be waiting for the serpent spirit to chase after him. There was a strange look on his face. Seeing this, I cursed inwardly. The fifth elder must be plotting something. The position of the 9 dragon pillars must be unusual. With that thought in mind, I immediately spoke to stop the serpent spirit from chasing after him. However, the serpent spirit was still angry and didn't pay attention to my words. His behavior made my heart tighten. In a flash, the serpent spirit flew in front of the fifth elder and opened its big mouth to bite him. Unexpectedly, an evil smile appeared on the fifth elder's face. In the blink of an eye, he jumped out. At the same time, a ray of golden light shot out from the 9 dragon pillars into the sky. In the blink of an eye, the golden light fell again and wrapped around the 9 dragon pillars, forming a sealed space. Seeing this, I had some thoughts. The fifth elder had placed Hui Hui in the middle of the 9 dragon pillars. Obviously, he wanted to use some method to force the blood out of her body. Now that the serpent spirit was trapped inside, it must be for the same reason. At this time, the golden light fell again in the sealed space, covering the serpent spirit's huge body. The serpent spirit opened its big mouth and glared at the fifth elder with its scarlet eyes. Its golden body writhed in the space, looking as if it was in great pain. However, I didn't hear the roar of a dragon. I couldn't even sense the aura of the spirit snake. It seemed that this sealed space could isolate everything. It was really frightening. This was something that even enlightened Master Guan's formation could not achieve. Nobody knew what these 9 dragon pillars were, but the golden light that they emitted had such power. While he was deep in thought, the snake spirit inside moved again. He seemed to sense that the golden light inside was very harmful to him. He no longer looked at the fifth elder. Instead, he twisted his body and crashed into the golden barrier. However, every time he collided with the golden light barrier, there was only a slight ripple on it and there was no further reaction. That Elder Wu was someone who had lived for almost 1,000 years. Furthermore, he was a scheming person, so he would definitely not do anything that he was not confident in. Since he had lured the serpent spirit into the 9 dragon pillars, he was certain that the serpent spirit would not be able to break the golden barrier. If that was the case, it would be impossible to escape by relying on the snake spirit's power alone. With this thought in mind, I raised my sword and flew toward the fifth elder. Since he could activate the light formation, he must know how to dispel it. As long as I could control him, the serpent spirit would be able to escape. In the blink of an eye, I arrived in front of the fifth elder. I raised the Xian Yuan sword and slashed at him. This time, I didn't send my Tao energy into the formation. Firstly, the Tao energy in my body was almost exhausted, and I couldn't support the Xian Yuan sword's consumption. Secondly, the fifth elder's body was made of flesh and blood. I was afraid that he wouldn't be able to resist the power of the Xian Yuan sword's Tao energy. If I made the slightest mistake and killed him, no one would be able to dispel the golden light formation. The fifth elder seemed to see through my misgivings. He snorted, and green smoke rose from his hands. He twisted his body and dodged the Xian Yuan sword. At the same time, his hands, which were wrapped in a thick monstrous aura, reached for my neck. I didn't panic. Instead, I turned around and increased the strength in my hand. I held the Xian Yuan sword horizontally in front of my chest in an attempt to block the attack. In the blink of an eye, the pair of dark green hands pressed on the Xian Yuan sword. The Xian Yuan sword was an ancient divine weapon with the power to expel all evils. Even if I didn't use my Tao energy, a monster like him wouldn't feel good if he touched it. Sure enough, when his hands touched the sword, the thick monstrous aura turned into white smoke and dissipated in the air. In less than a few seconds, the fifth elder let out an anguished wail and immediately retracted his hands. He retreated repeatedly with a twisted and embarrassed expression. Now that he knew how powerful the Xian Yuan sword was, he didn't dare to attack me. He stood where he was and looked at the snake spirit from time to time. His behavior made me more worried about the snake spirit, so I also looked at him. After dozens of seconds, the snake spirit was lying on the ground with wounds all over his body. His blood had dyed the ground red, and his bright eyes looked a little blurry. However, he didn't give up struggling. He trembled and propped up his body, trying to hit the golden barrier again. I felt sorry for the snake spirit, and I hated the fifth elder even more. I raised the Xian Yuan sword and slashed at him one more time. This time, he was smart. He didn't want to fight me face to face. Instead, he leaped and flew into the air. I looked up and chased after him. The fifth elder didn't panic when he saw me chasing him. Instead, he chanted a strange sound. The rhythm of the sound was almost the same as the one I'd heard when I first arrived here. It seemed he didn't want to waste time with me. He wanted to force the blood out of the snake spirit's body as soon as possible. I didn't dare to hide anymore. I quickly retrieved the Xian Yuan sword into my body. I closed my eyes and moved the witchcraft energy in my heavenly veins to my life palace. I wanted to use the witchcraft energy transformation technique. After a few seconds, the yang spirit in my life palace spat out a thick silver needle. At the same time, a similar silver needle appeared in my palm. As soon as the silver needle appeared, I felt powerless. However, I didn't care about it. I focused on the silver needle in my hand. In the next second, the silver needle was formed. I didn't waste any time and threw it at the fifth elder. The fifth elder, who was chanting the spell, seemed to realize that danger was approaching. He stopped chanting and looked at me. When the thick silver needle left his hand, it separated into hundreds of small silver needles. The fifth elder didn't have any room to dodge. He might have realized that the power of the silver needles wasn't ordinary, but he couldn't dodge them. He turned around and transformed into his original form, trying to use his scales to block the hundreds of silver needles. I had seen the defensive power of its scales before. However, the power of the armor-removing sword that was full of Tao energy couldn't be compared to my witchcraft energy transformation technique. My technique was enough to kill a Yang God celestial master at the intermediate stage. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of silver needles were in front of the giant python. The giant python seemed to have an idea. It twisted its body and took the initiative to meet the needles. However, to its surprise, the silver needles weren't blocked by the hard scales. Instead, they all drilled into its body. It was really a bit whimsical. My witchcraft energy transformation technique had the effect of the Yang God. Moreover, my Yang God was a combination of Tao energy and witchcraft energy. Its strength was comparable to the peak of the Yang God. After being hit, the giant green python's body became slightly erratic. It swayed in the air for a few seconds before heavily hitting the ground. When it landed, it returned to its human form. It lay on the ground and kept twitching. Dark red blood kept gushing out of its mouth. He looked like he was seriously injured, but I wasn't sure if he had any other tricks up his sleeves, so I landed next to him and channeled the remaining qi in my body into my palm. Then, I slammed my palm on his chest. After doing all this, the Tao energy in my body was exhausted. My witchcraft energy was also exhausted, and my body was a little weak. However, I didn't dare to show any signs of fatigue. I had to pretend to be calm. I squatted down and said coldly, "If you don't stop that strange formation, I'll destroy your young god." After listening to me, the fifth elder didn't panic. Instead, he smiled and replied weakly, "This blood-devouring formation was originally designed for the Dragon Clan. It will never stop unless the blood in its body is forced out. I just used a secret technique. Just wait to collect the dragon's corpse." After that, he didn't say anything else. I didn't know if he was telling the truth or not. However, after thinking about it carefully, he was like an arrow at the end of its flight. Maybe he wouldn't lie to me. If that was the case, there was really no way to save the snake spirit. Thinking of this, I couldn't calm down. However, I was exhausted, so I could only call Tong Tong and ask him to destroy his young god. At this time, the fifth elder couldn't move. In terms of strength, he wasn't strong enough to compete with Tong Tong. When Tong Tong saw my gloomy face, he didn't hesitate. He released pure Een energy from his hands and pressed them on the fifth elder's life palace. At this moment, he had no strength to resist. He let out a low cry, and his body twitched a few times before he lost his vitality. At the same time, his drifting young god was held in Tong Tong's hand. The Een energy in Tong Tong's hand became stronger. In just a moment, the fifth elder's young god disappeared from this world. After that, I went to the blood-devouring formation and stared at the snake spirit inside, frowning. Although I was angry and anxious, I couldn't save the snake spirit. At this moment, I could only resign myself to fate. I hoped that after the snake spirit's blood was extracted, it would still have a breath left. While I was thinking, the golden light in the blood-devouring formation became brighter. The snake spirit raised its head and slammed it on the ground. It seemed to want to use this self-mutilation to divert its pain. When Tong Tong saw this, he quietly came over and begged me to save the snake spirit. Chapter 856. I didn't know how to respond to Tong Tong, so I could only hope that the snake spirit was lucky. As I thought about this, I couldn't help but feel sorrowful. At the same time, I was also thinking about something. The snake spirit's original form was a winged dragon. In the ancient war, the Yellow Emperor had ridden a winged dragon to kill Chiyu. It wasn't just a coincidence that I had met the snake spirit. According to my previous speculation about the ancient war, the snake spirit might have been a chess piece that Emperor Ku had arranged to be by my side. If that was the case, the snake spirit would one day turn into a winged dragon, and he would be very useful in the future. Thus, he wouldn't die so easily. As I thought about this, I calmed down and took out the jade bracelet to absorb the true dragon chi inside to replenish my strength. As for Tong Tong, she still wore a distressed face. I wanted to explain to her what I was thinking, but this matter involved many things, so I didn't know where to start. While I was thinking, Tong Tong suddenly screamed. I hurried to look at the formation. After struggling a few times, the snake spirit seemed to have lost all his strength. He lay on the ground with blood gushing out from his mouth and nose. At the same time, a drop of golden blood flowed out from his tail. It hung at the end of his tail and didn't fall for a long time. Soon, another drop of golden blood flowed out from his tailbone. Then, the process of the blood flowing out from his feet, hands, and cervical vertebrae repeated 8 times. After 8 drops of blood were drawn out, the snake spirit's body became thinner. He looked extremely haggard. Even I couldn't help but feel anxious. I couldn't predict what would happen next. At this moment, the snake spirit's pair of horns suddenly trembled. It seemed that the blood in between his eyebrows was about to leave his body. My heart tightened. The blood in between his eyebrows was the snake spirit's lifeblood, and it was also the last drop. If this drop of blood left his body, how could the snake spirit still be alive? While I was nervous, I also had some doubts. The number of blood essences was usually 10, but the snake spirit had only 9 drops. I didn't know why. While I was thinking, the serpent spirit in the blood-devouring formation woke up. I didn't have time to worry about the amount of blood I had and turned to look at him. At this time, the spirit serpent was wrapped in an indescribable aura. It didn't care about the blood essence that was seeping out of its body. After opening its eyes, it let out a roar and stood up with its head held high. On its huge dragon head, there was actually a shadow. After a careful examination, I discovered that although this phantom looked similar to the spirit serpent, it had a pair of 10-meter-long wings on its back. Back in Chio's tomb, when he mistakenly entered the primordial battlefield, the serpent spirit had produced a similar shadow. It was Yinglong. At this moment, the serpent spirit was on the brink of life and death. The sleeping winged dragon phantom in its body was finally stimulated. The worry in my heart was finally relieved. Previously, the fifth elder had said that the blood-devouring array was specially designed for the dragon clan, but the serpent spirit's true form was a winged dragon, the symbol of the dragon clan's strongest power. The blood-devouring formation was effective against ordinary dragons, but it was not effective against Inglong's absolute power. Although it was only a winged dragon phantom, it could still trigger a trace of Inglong's power. It wasn't something that the blood-devouring formation could resist. Just as I was thinking about this, the spirit serpent moved again. He raised his head and roared, swallowing the drops of blood essence that had been extracted from his body. Then, he twisted his huge body and hit the golden barrier. With a crisp sound, the golden barrier shattered, and the surrounding golden light dissipated. Now, the spirit serpent had finally escaped from the blood-devouring formation. As soon as he got out of the formation, the winged dragon phantom behind the spirit serpent couldn't be maintained and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The spirit serpent returned to his original appearance and fell to the ground. I quickly went forward to check on his injuries. After a thorough examination, I found that although the spirit serpent had retrieved his blood essence, it hadn't returned to its original position. Instead, it was colliding in his body and could break out at any time. It was the first time I had encountered such a situation, so I didn't know how to solve it. I turned to ask Tong Tong, but she was also at a loss and couldn't give me a valuable answer. It hadn't been easy for the spirit serpent to get out of the blood-devouring formation. If his blood essence left his body again, his life would be in danger. In a moment of desperation, I suddenly remembered that the death scripture contained many cultivation techniques. Perhaps I could find a way to help the spirit serpent stabilize his injuries. As such, I didn't care too much and took out the death scripture from Shangliu's pouch. After searching for a while, I didn't find anything. Just then, I heard a weak voice next to me. I turned and saw that Hui Hui had woken up, but she was powerless and couldn't stand up. She could only crawl towards us. I quickly got up and walked to her side. I carefully helped her to sit next to the spirit serpent. Then, I asked her if there was a good way to save the spirit serpent. Hui Hui didn't answer me immediately. Instead, she stretched out her trembling hand and gently stroked the spirit serpent's head. She murmured, "Brother Long, it's really fate that makes fun of people. I thought I would never see you again. I didn't expect that you would find this place. It's just that we've met today, and it's going to be a life and death parting." Her words made me frown. Logically speaking, although Hui's injuries were quite serious, it wasn't incurable. What she had revealed earlier seemed to have a way to save the spirit serpent. Why was there a life and death parting? Could it be that she was going to sacrifice herself to save the spirit serpent? That was what I thought, but I didn't ask. If it was really as I had expected, I really didn't know how to intervene. Compared to the spirit serpent, Hui's importance was much lower. Moreover, the spirit serpent had become like this because of Hui. Psychologically speaking, I naturally hoped that the spirit serpent could survive. Of course, that was just my selfish thought. There were feelings between the spirit serpent and Hui. Although the spirit serpent had never mentioned it, judging from his furious expression when he had sensed that Hui might be in danger, the spirit serpent's feelings for Hui were far from what he had said. He had taken such a big risk to save Hui. At this time, Hui could also choose to sacrifice herself to save the spirit serpent. Feelings were mutual. Give me a peach and I'll repay you with a jade. This was a normal thing. Therefore, after realizing this, I still didn't stop him. Of course, even if I did, Hui wouldn't stop. So I stood quietly on the side, waiting for Hui's next move. After a while, she turned her head and told me that if I wanted to save the spirit serpent, I had to use blood essence to guide it. However, the blood essence used had to be compatible with the spirit serpent. After listening to her, I roughly understood the treatment method, but I still had doubts in my heart. Although Hui showed signs of transforming into a flood dragon, she was still a scale insect of the mortal world. The spirit serpent had already transformed into a true dragon. I was afraid that her blood essence wouldn't be compatible with it. With that in mind, I asked Hui Hui about the details. Hui Hui didn't speak immediately. Instead, she fell silent, as if she was weighing the pros and cons in her heart. After a while, she raised her head again and said in a weak voice, "Brother Zhou, promise me that you must save Brother Long." I would save the spirit serpent without her saying anything. However, there seemed to be another meaning in her words. It seemed that she felt that if she told me the reason, my determination to save the spirit serpent would be shaken. I was a little surprised, but then I understood. Hui Hui didn't really understand the relationship between me and the spirit serpent, so she was worried. After I nodded and agreed, Hui Hui finally forced a smile on her face. She then told me that her own blood essence couldn't be compatible with the spirit serpent, but she had a drop of the spirit serpent's blood essence in her body. This blood essence could be used to save the spirit serpent. Hearing this, I remembered that when the spirit serpent was in the blood-devouring formation, I only saw 9 drops of blood essence. I thought that it was because of his special physique that he only had 9 drops of blood essence. I didn't expect that the 10th drop of blood essence was in Hui Hui's body. After asking, I learned that when the spirit serpent had first met Hui Hui, she had been seriously injured in order to escape from the Lu clan and was on the verge of death. It was the spirit serpent who had used a drop of its own blood essence to save Hui Hui's life. Since then, the spirit serpent's blood essence had remained in Hui Hui's body. After listening to her, I was suddenly enlightened. No wonder the Lu clan coveted Hui Hui's blood essence. In fact, it was the spirit serpent's blood essence that had brought about a disaster. Hui Hui had shown signs of turning into a Jiao dragon because of the spirit serpent's blood essence, just like what the Lu clan elder had said. In the end, what the Lu clan coveted was the spirit serpent's blood essence. It was no wonder that they were so crazy. The spirit serpent had the bloodline of the winged dragon, which was a fatal attraction to the Lu clan. I now had a vague answer to the spirit serpent's indifference to Hui Hui. Over the years, the spirit serpent had been by my side and had experienced a lot. Somehow, he should have felt that he was extraordinary and knew that he and Hui Hui were people from 2 different worlds. Perhaps that was why he had chosen to let go of this relationship, but he hadn't expected that he would encounter such a thing in the end. As for Hui Hui, after talking about the past, she was already sobbing. After a long time, she said to me, "Brother Zhou, Hui Hui has a request. I hope Brother Zhou will agree to it." After listening to the story between her and the spirit serpent, I was quite moved. Now that she was willing to sacrifice herself to save the spirit serpent, as long as it was within my power, I naturally wouldn't refuse. Chapter 857. Hui Hui's words made sense. When the snake spirit woke up, I would immediately take him away from here. But she told me not to tell the snake spirit about Hui Hui's death. I was silent for a moment. It wasn't that I didn't understand what she meant, but if I did that, it would be too unfair to Hui Hui. She seemed to see through my thoughts and quickly said, "Hui Hui is a person who is about to die. Thanks to Brother Long for saving me. It is Hui Hui's great fortune to return my life to Brother Long. Brother Long's blood has been in Hui Hui's body for hundreds of years. This return also means that Hui Hui can accompany Brother Long at any time. Hui Hui can die without regret. Hui Hui only wishes to be with Brother Long in the next life." Her words moved me. It reminded me of Wu Yu's words in Chio's tomb. It could be said that since ancient times, the most bitter people in the world were infatuated with love. Tong Tong, who was next to me, couldn't bear to see this. She turned around and flew back into the jade bracelet. After Hui Hui said this, she gritted her teeth and used the last of her strength to force out the blood that the snake spirit had given her. She held the drop of blood in her hands and handed it to me. Her eyes were blurred and she couldn't speak. However, I also knew what she meant. She wanted to ask me to cure the snake spirit. I nodded and responded softly. Hui Hui squeezed out a smile and her hands fell naturally. Although Hui Hui had left, The most important thing right now was to treat the snake spirit as soon as possible to avoid any accident. I let out a long sigh and calmed myself down. Then, a strong Taoist aura appeared on my hands and I injected the blood into the snake spirit's body. This was far from enough. The snake spirit's injuries were too serious and couldn't repair itself. It needed an external force to guide the blood back to its original position. As such, I didn't delay. The Taoist aura in my body circulated wildly and wrapped around the snake spirit's huge dragon body. After an unknown amount of time, the snake spirit's blood returned to its original position. The huge dragon body gradually returned to its original appearance, but the snake spirit still hadn't woken up. After a long struggle, the Taoist aura in my body was exhausted again. Fortunately, the sound of our fight didn't attract the Liu clan, so there was enough time for us to recover. 2 hours later, the snake spirit finally opened his eyes. The first thing he said was to ask about Hui's situation. I didn't tell him. Instead, I pointed at Hui, who had turned into a little white snake. The spirit snake followed my finger and looked in the direction I was pointing at. Then, it moved its head forward and sniffed. Tears welled up in its eyes. It lifted its head and roared. Then, he returned to his human form and held Hui in his arms, tears streaming down his face. After a long time, he calmed down and asked, "What's going on?" When he asked, I followed Hui's instructions and told the spirit snake, emphasizing that Hui didn't want him to take revenge. After listening to me, the spirit snake was enraged. It ignored my attempts to stop it and dashed out of the valley. Seeing this, my heart tightened and I immediately chased after him. I stopped in front of him and scolded, "If you go like this, you'll be courting death." Before Hui left, she said that as long as you're alive, she'll be alive. Think about it yourself. Then, I stepped aside and signaled for him to make his own choice. After listening to my words, he was stunned. After a long time, he sighed and said, "I want to take Hui out and bury her properly." Seeing him like this, I felt sorry for him. I walked forward and patted his shoulder. It's not that we don't want to take revenge, but we don't have enough strength to protect ourselves. One day we'll come back to collect the debt. After I said that, the spirit snake's complexion improved a little. He nodded and handed the little white snake to me. Then, he turned around and transformed back into his original form. He hit the monster energy barrier in front of us. In the blink of an eye, the monster energy barrier shattered, revealing an empty valley. Now that the monster energy in the jade bracelet had been exhausted, we didn't dare to stay here any longer. I flew and landed on the back of the spirit snake, and the two of us flew in the direction we had come from. I signaled the spirit snake to speed up. I didn't slow down and urged the Taoist energy in my body to increase our flying speed. In just 10 seconds, we rushed out of the Liu clan and landed in the place we had come from. After landing, we didn't dare to stop for even a moment because I faintly felt that someone was chasing behind us. The spirit snake's injury hadn't healed yet. After flying at such a high speed, it had exhausted its strength. At this time, it was lying on the ground and panting. Seeing this, I signaled for him to return to my back. The spirit snake didn't dare to hesitate. He stood up shakily and disappeared. After the spirit snake left, I hid my aura and ran toward the cave where Hui had lived. After half an hour, I finally arrived at the place. At this time, I didn't find anyone chasing us. Perhaps they hadn't sensed my aura. I leaned against the stone wall in the cave for a long time before summoning the spirit snake. Then, I handed the little white snake from Xiang Lu's pouch to him. After the spirit snake took it, he dug a deep hole in the ground and gently placed the little white snake in it. Then, he buried it bit by bit. After the small grave was built, he said, "Hui, after Brother Long takes revenge for you, I will erect a tombstone for you." Then, he stood up and walked out of the cave with me. He didn't turn his head back. After leaving the cave, we headed directly to the fire god temple. Along the way, the spirit snake didn't say a word. After this incident, I felt that he had matured a lot, but I didn't know if it was good or bad. However, everything had a process. No matter who said that their lover had died, they wouldn't be able to recover immediately. When we arrived at the fire god temple, it was already evening. I stood in front of the fire god temple and didn't enter immediately. Instead, I looked around and didn't find anything strange. Then, I stepped in. The furnishings in the temple were still the same. There were no signs that anyone had moved around, but I still couldn't see the contract. Although there were still 2 days before Tao Wu would appear, after the previous incident with the spirit snake, I couldn't wait to see Tao Wu. After entering the fire god temple, the spirit snake signaled for me to rest in the outer hall. Perhaps he didn't want to see me and Tao Wu. He was afraid that the scene would bring back memories. I understood his intentions and told him that if he needed anything, he could find me in the inner room. Then, I turned around and entered the inner room. Everything in the room was so familiar that I couldn't help but want to take a few more glances. After I calmed down, I sat on the bed and began to adjust my breathing. 2 days later, Tao Wu arrived as promised. At that moment, I intended to get off the bed and walk around. When I opened my eyes, I saw her staring at me with her hands supporting her cheeks. When I saw that, I felt a surge of warmth in my heart. I casually pulled Tao Wu into my embrace. The two of us didn't say anything when we met. Just a hug was enough. After what had happened earlier, I felt a lot of emotions. I looked forward to staying with Tao Wu for a long time. After lingering for a while, I retracted my thoughts and recalled the doubts I had when I came here. I decided to ask Tao Wu about it. Tao Wu seemed to notice that my expression was strange and asked me what was bothering me. I didn't hesitate and casually told her about the many things that I had experienced in the past half a year. I gradually understood my mission and also found out about my relationship with her in my previous life. At this point, Lao Ai interrupted me. She snuggled into my embrace and softly said, "Although husband is his reincarnation, that matter has nothing to do with husband. To be able to become husband and wife in this life is Lao Ai's greatest fortune. Husband, please don't take the past to heart." Hearing her words, my heart warmed. With such a beautiful wife, what more could I ask for? However, when she mentioned marrying me, it made me want to confirm something with her. With that in mind, I asked Tao Wu if our marriage was a coincidence or if someone had done it on purpose. After hearing that, Tao Wu's face showed a trace of disappointment. When I saw her like that, I immediately explained that for the past half a year, I had always felt that I was a chess piece. I only wanted to know who the chess player was and what he was planning. I wasn't doubting the relationship between us. After hearing that, Tao Wu's expression changed. She paused and told me that she also didn't know about this matter. It was just that someone had asked her to hand over the jade bracelet and the death scripture to me. As for why, that person didn't explain in detail. Hearing that, I quickly asked, was that person Emperor Ku, Shang-Chi, or Nangong? Unexpectedly, Tao Wu shook her head and told me that she hadn't seen that person's face. She also didn't tell her the reason and simply mentioned that it was Emperor Yan's last wish. Hearing that, my mind suddenly went blank. Things were getting more and more confusing. Previously, I had thought that Emperor Ku was behind everything, but now I knew that Emperor Yan was also involved. In that case, when Uncle Lin told me that this matter had something to do with the ancient war in Medicine King Valley, he wasn't lying. Emperor Ku was a descendant of the Yellow Emperor, so it was possible that the Yellow Emperor was also involved. If the Yellow Emperor and the Flame Emperor were involved, did that mean that Monster Emperor June was also involved? After thinking about it carefully, I realized that since I was the reincarnation of Emperor Ku and Monster Emperor June, if their ultimate goal was to open the mountain and sea realm, there was no need for me to appear. Or perhaps, there was no need for me to appear as the reincarnation of Emperor Ku and Monster Emperor June. In that case, the plan of the three people in the ancient war wasn't to open the mountain and sea realm, but something else. However, Tao Wu didn't know about this. Nangong was just like me, Emperor Ku's chess piece, so he didn't know about it either. Uncle Lin only had a vague idea, so he didn't know anything. As such, only the evil spirit was left. All these years, he and Nangong have been assisting me in my growth. When I heard Nangong talk about opening the mountain and sea realm, I thought that the evil spirit was on the side of the monster race. But after thinking about it carefully, I realized that he already knew about my identity. Since he hadn't participated in the monster race's preparations, his goal wasn't to open the mountain and sea realm. In addition to that, I was most curious about why he, a subordinate of the Flame Emperor, would pledge allegiance to Monster Emperor June and instigate the ancient war. Chapter 858. After understanding these things, my eyebrows relaxed. However, according to my understanding of the sacrificial evil spirit, since this matter was of great importance, no matter how much I asked, he wouldn't tell me the details. In other words, I only gained something in meaning, but in reality, I still knew nothing. With that in mind, I didn't continue thinking about it. This matter would eventually be revealed to the world, and I wouldn't have to waste my energy thinking about it. Previously, I had planned to ask Bai An about the Death Scripture's effects, but now it seemed that she didn't know the key to it. So, I simply put the matter to the back of my mind and enjoyed the hard-won world of just the two of us. One day was really too short. The next day, Bai An got up early to prepare food for me. As I watched her busy figure, I thought about the snake spirit from yesterday and couldn't help but sigh. If only I could stay with Bai An for a long time. How wonderful would that be? Whenever the word "if" was mentioned, it could only be an unrealistic expectation. When Bai An finished cooking, we smiled at each other and sat down to eat. We didn't say anything, but we did our best to slow down our movements, wanting to enjoy this hard-won time together. Parting was inevitable. We had experienced it a few times already, so there wasn't much sadness in this moment. At least, Bai An and I didn't have any expressions of sadness on our faces. She calmly stood up with a smile on her face, and said that she would watch me leave. Perhaps Bai An's strength had infected me, but my heart felt warm. Even after we left the Fire God Temple, my heart remained calm and my mood didn't fluctuate much. When I turned around and saw the fiery red Fire God Temple behind me, I felt a little apprehensive. Bai An was calm and so was I. But this was only on the surface. In reality, the opening of the mountain and sea realm was approaching, and it was very likely that this would be the last time I saw Bai An. In fact, I didn't know what this meant, but I couldn't avoid the fear in my heart. When the Fire God Temple disappeared before me, I forced myself to calm down and didn't stay any longer. I left this place and headed toward Wangu Grotto Heaven. Just like before, I was still cautious. I completely concealed my aura and covered my surroundings with my spiritual sense. I carefully moved forward to avoid any mishaps. Fortunately, no one seemed to be following me this time. I walked out of the Shenangjia forest without encountering any trouble. After leaving Shenangjia, I rushed to the airport and boarded the flight to Wangu Heavenly Cave. During the voyage, I didn't have the heart to cultivate. I laid on my seat and couldn't help but think about what Uncle Lin had said. Opening the mountain and sea realm didn't require overwhelming power. All one had to do was gather the 10 great divine items, the 3 keys, and a pair of jade bracelets. I've confirmed this with Nangong before. As for why he wants me to use my free time to practice cultivation, it's all in preparation for when the mountain and sea realm opens. I already knew about these things. In fact, even without Uncle Lin telling me, I was already prepared for it. Right now, I'm thinking about the demonic tribe in the mountain and sea realm. From the moment Nangong gave me the sword, I knew that the mountain and sea realm was a place where the shamans and demons coexisted. Thousands of years had passed, and no one knew exactly what had happened inside. However, based on what had happened in the past, Demon Emperor June had led the demon folk into the mountain and sea realm. The fact that he had been able to force Shenong to commit suicide proved that the demon folk were incredibly powerful. Now that it was open again, the most likely scenario was that the demon folk had come out to wreak havoc in the mortal world. At that time, great waves would surely rise between the human and demon tribes. To Nangong and Bayan, opening the mountain and sea realm and searching for the shamans was extremely important. As for the demon folk like the Green Hill clan and the Lu clan, it was the same. As for Patriarch Li, Celestial Master Zhang, and the other experts with exceedingly high cultivation bases, they were all looking forward to the opening of the mountain and sea realm. As for me, the opening of the mountain and sea realm didn't have much meaning. The only meaning I had was worry. I had to worry about what the mountain and sea realm would bring to the human world. I had been worried about this issue for a long time, and when I asked Nangong about it, he said that if the demon folk appeared, the humans would be able to drive them away a second time. However, the reality was that the human world was no longer the same as it had been all those years ago, when Yen and Huang were divided and ruled. Living beings didn't exist solely for the purpose of cultivation. In fact, most people didn't even know that the path of cultivation existed. Therefore, the conflict between the humans and the demons had long since been buried in the river of history. If we wanted to start it again, it would be far more difficult than the first time. The more I thought about it, the heavier my heart became. At the same time, my resistance to the matter grew clearer. When Nangong mentioned it earlier, I didn't immediately reject his decision, because I wasn't sure how things would play out in the end. Now that I knew what the consequences would be, I knew that even if I spoke up against it, it would be useless. Nangong had been planning for this for thousands of years, and it wasn't something that I could persuade him with a few words. Before I knew it, I had found myself standing in opposition to Nangong. As for the Xian, Taoist, and Buddhist sects, as well as the demon folk, their ultimate goal was to open the mountain and sea realm. Therefore, they were on the same side as Nangong. Even Wang Can, as well as all the other blessed lands and paradises, had the same interests. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but smile wryly. At this time, the plane started to land. I smiled wryly and put the matter aside for the time being. After the plane landed, I left the airport and went to Mount Wangu. On the way, I used a sound-transmitting talisman to contact Wang Can and told him that I was going to go there immediately. When I arrived at the mountain pass, Officer Wang was already waiting for me with his clansmen. When they saw me, Wang Can and the other members of the Wangu heavenly abode knelt and respectfully greeted me. I was already familiar with this scene, but now I was stunned. I suddenly realized that if I stopped Nangong from opening the mountain and sea realm, the people of the Nine Cauldron clan wouldn't recognize me. I couldn't help but feel ridiculous. Wang Can seemed to notice that I was in a daze, so he didn't mind offending me. He stood up and approached me, asking, "What's the matter?" His words pulled me out of my thoughts. I waved my hand but didn't say anything. Then, I asked the kneeling people to stand up. Since I didn't want to tell him, Wang Can didn't ask further. He just followed me carefully. After a while, we arrived at the Wanwu heavenly abode. I didn't hurry to Wang Can's father's mansion. Instead, I asked Wang Can about Mi Tai's situation. Speaking of which, I wasn't qualified to be his master. It had been a year since I'd left Mi Tai here, but I hadn't asked him about his situation. Wang Can smiled when he heard my question. Then, he told me that after I'd left, he'd arranged for Mi Tai to stay in his father's mansion and use the formations there to cultivate. Over the past year or so, it was rare to see him. Even his meals were delivered to his door every day. However, a few days ago there was a strange phenomenon in the sky above the mansion. Heavenly lightning appeared. I was startled. Mi Tai had become a heavenly seal heavenly master? When I first met him, I thought that he wasn't suitable for cultivation. I hadn't expected that when I returned to the Mi family's manor, he would have a Shuryao cultivation base. Now, in just over a year, he had become a heavenly seal heavenly master. Compared to him, it had taken me 10 years to obtain the dragon seal. His cultivation talent was really amazing. Of course, talent was only one aspect. Mi Tai's cultivation base could reach his current level not only because of his talent and his desire to cultivate, but also because of the formation in Wang Can's father's mansion, which provided him with abundant shaman energy. That's not the only reason. During the past year, I've had the feeling that something has changed in the world. It's not just Mi Tai. Even I can sense that my cultivation is progressing much faster than before. It's almost as if the mountain and sea realm is opening up. Something has changed without me even realizing it. Of course, it was just a vague feeling. I couldn't tell what it was exactly. While talking about Mi Tai's situation, I planned to visit him. However, Officer Wang told me that he had prepared a banquet to welcome me. Since he was so kind, I couldn't refuse. I nodded and decided to go to the banquet first. Soon after, we arrived at a palace. This palace was where the banquet had been held at the Heavenly Grand Ritual. I remembered Wang Can mentioning that unless there was something important, he wouldn't hold a banquet here. Except for the Heavenly Grand Ritual, Wang Can had never held a banquet here. Given my status, it was normal for Wang Can to hold a banquet here. However, it made me feel like I was an outsider. So, after thinking about it for a while, I realized that Wang Can had held a banquet here to welcome me. That was the truth. I called Wang Can and asked him about it. He told me that another distinguished guest had come today. He was also a member of the Witch Clan. According to him, he had come to discuss important matters. The Witch Clan? I subconsciously asked. Do I know this person? Wang Can shook his head. This is the first time I've seen this person. I don't know if I know him or not. However, this person isn't from the Nine Cauldrons clan, and he doesn't seem to have any clansmen. However, he's strong, so I don't dare to treat him lightly. After saying that, he asked me not to blame him. After listening to him, I started to ponder. When I heard that a member of the Witch Clan had come, I instinctively thought that it was the evil sacrificial spirit. However, Wang Can said that he didn't know this person, so I dismissed this possibility. I had heard from Nangong that apart from the Nine Cauldrons clan and the Medicine King Valley, there were no members of the Witch Clan in this world. This Wanwu Grotto Heaven was a secluded place. Since this person could find this place, could it be Nangong? With that thought in mind, I quickened my pace and walked toward the inner hall. As soon as I entered the door, I saw a man standing with his hands clasped behind his back. That man's figure was really familiar. I recognized him at first glance and called his name. Nangong, why are you here? Hearing my call, Nangong leisurely turned around and looked at me with a smile. I came to discuss some matters with this junior. I didn't expect to meet you here. Unexpected? I don't think so. When I was talking to Uncle Lin in the Medicine King Valley, I already had a guess. Uncle Lin had always stayed in his hometown and didn't go out. Even if he always paid attention to the mountain and sea realm's affairs, he couldn't be like Nangong, who knew everything. However, when he called me out, he told me to leave the Medicine King Valley and find a place to cultivate in peace. Uncle Lin had never cared about my affairs, so it was strange for him to say something like that, unless someone had specifically told him about it or asked him to do something. As far as I knew, only the evil sacrificial spirit and Nangong could do something like that. However, according to the arrogant and aloof nature of the evil sacrificial spirit, he wouldn't let others help him. After thinking about it carefully, I realized that Nangong was the only one who could do that. Therefore, Nangong's words sounded like he was playing with me. Chapter 859. Wang Can's bloodline was one of the 9 cauldrons of the witch tribe. Naturally, he had to inform them about the mountain and sea realm. However, according to Wang Can, he didn't know Nangong, which meant that they hadn't met before. Nangong had been planning for the mountain and sea realm for thousands of years. Since Wang Can's bloodline was a witch tribe and the leader of the paradise, their power couldn't be compared to others. Nangong should have informed them earlier to help him. I didn't understand why he had come to Wanwu Grotto Heaven to inform Wang Can only now. Thinking about that, I voiced out the doubts in my heart, hoping that Nangong could help me dispel them. After listening to me, Nangong calmly waved his hand, indicating that we shouldn't talk about it for the time being. It wouldn't be too late to talk about it after Wang Can arrived. After a while, Wang Can hurried over and apologized to us, saying that he had some urgent matters to deal with. That was why we were delayed. Wang Can had to take care of everything in Wanwu Grotto Heaven, which was a bit difficult for him, but I didn't mind. After Wang Can took a seat, Nangong still didn't want to tell us why he had come. He just chatted with Wang Can. At first, I was a little worried, but as I listened, I learned something. From what Nangong said, it seemed he had been to Wanwu Grotto Heaven some years ago, and he even knew Wang Can's father. As soon as Wang Can heard that Nangong knew his father, he looked happy. Then, he asked, "Junior is a little blind. I didn't know that you were my father's good friend. However, my father has never mentioned that he has a good friend in the outside world." Nangong's expression didn't change. He just replied, "In the past 100 years, I've been busy with many things, so I haven't been to Wanwu Grotto Heaven. It's normal that you don't know about it." After hearing that, Wang Can looked a little surprised. However, he quickly recovered. He seemed to realize that since Nangong was a friend of his father, he was definitely not an ordinary person. Then, he changed the topic and didn't talk about it anymore. After about half an hour, Wang Can seemed to feel that this kind of chat was very boring, so he asked Nangong what he wanted to tell him today. Nangong didn't answer. He asked Wang Can if his father had told him about the mountain and sea realm. Wang Can didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me and then at Nangong. From the looks of it, it was clear that he already knew. Hence, there was no need to waste any more words. Nangong seemed to have understood. He nodded and asked again, "Did your father explain anything about the Wanwu Grotto Heaven? Wanwu Grotto Heaven has a forbidden area? I've been here more than once or twice. Why haven't I heard Wang Can mention it?" However, thinking about it from another perspective, this Wanwu paradise was the head of the paradise, possessing 4 true dragon veins and 1,000 mountains. Moreover, it had been passed down for several thousand years, so it wasn't strange for a forbidden area to exist. However, Wang Can didn't even tell me about the forbidden area. Why did Wang Can's father tell Nangong? After thinking about it for a while, I guessed that Officer Wang's father knew about Nangong's plan. The two of them had some kind of agreement. It seemed Nangong had come for the Forbidden Land this time. To be exact, he had come for something in the Forbidden Land. Thinking about this, I gave Nangong a questioning look. However, he ignored me and stared at Officer Wang as if he was waiting for his response. After hearing this, Wang Can's face darkened in an instant. There was a trace of vigilance in his eyes, and he asked Nangong why he mentioned this. I could understand why he looked like this. Officer Wang wasn't an impulsive person. Since the forbidden area was top secret, Officer Wang naturally wanted to figure out Nangong's real purpose. Seeing this, Nangong's expression didn't change. He just replied indifferently, "You don't need to be so vigilant. I'm here today to be a witness." His words were interesting. Why did he come here to be a witness? Officer Wang was like me. He didn't know what Nangong meant, so he asked Nangong what he meant. After listening to him, Nangong stood up and whispered to Officer Wang, "The thing to open the mountain and sea realm." Hearing this, I was startled. The things to open the mountain and sea realm were the jade bracelet, the key, and the 10 divine tools. The jade bracelet and the key had been mastered one by one, and the only things missing were the 10 divine tools. Could it be that there was a divine tool in the Wanwu Paradise's forbidden area? 9 of the 10 divine tools had been revealed. In that case, the one in the Wanwu Paradise was the last one. Except for the Xianyuan sword in my hand and the Kunlun mirror in Nangong's hand, Nangong had never touched any of the previous divine tools. He had come here to be a witness. Presumably, he couldn't wait to open the mountain and sea realm. At this time, Officer Wang reacted. He frowned and asked, "Did my father tell Senior about this?" Nangong nodded, confirming Officer Wang's words. Seeing this, Wang Qin did not respond immediately. He seemed to weigh the pros and cons in his mind. After a while, he looked up at Nangong again and said, "My father once told me that the forbidden area was a top secret. Unless you have a token, you can't tell me the location of the forbidden area." After saying that, Officer Wang turned to look at me as if he was apologizing. I shook my head and said, "It doesn't matter. I'm not an unreasonable person. Since his father told me to do this, why should I care about Officer Wang's concealment?" However, Nangong didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took out the Kunlun mirror, which was wrapped in witch qi. Then, he waved his hand, and the Kunlun mirror revealed its original appearance. Then, he handed it to Officer Wang and said, "Is this what your father said?" Officer Wang took the Kunlun mirror, which was full of spiritual energy. After checking it over and over again, he looked surprised and exclaimed, "This is the Kunlun mirror, an ancient divine tool?" Officer Wang looked at Nangong. After confirming that he was right, he looked away and stared at the Kunlun mirror for a long time. Then, he returned it to Nangong. Then, he stood up and bowed to Nangong. "Senior, please forgive me for my presumptuous words. However, the forbidden area is really important. Moreover, my father told me to check it carefully. Before he left, my father did tell me that the person who came would bring the Kunlun mirror with him. When the time comes, I should listen to his instructions." Nangong waved his hand and gestured for Officer Wang to sit down. Then, he said, "Your father and I are close friends. You don't have to call me senior. Just call me uncle." Then, without waiting for Officer Wang's response, he gestured for him to go to the forbidden area. "We need to open the forbidden area today." Officer Wang was stunned. He looked at me with an apologetic face. It seemed that he didn't know the relationship between me and Nangong. I got up and told him that I had known Nangong for a long time. This was also confirmed by Nangong. After Wang Qin heard it, he suddenly understood and said, "I understand." Since Nangong was so anxious, we didn't stay here for long. We left the palace and flew to the forbidden area. About 15 minutes later, we stopped in front of a mountain stream. At first glance, I found that the mountain stream looked familiar. It seemed that I had been here before. After thinking about it carefully, I found that Han Wennan and I had gone to the Wanwu cave to break the barrier of the Penglai immortal region. We found the Kylan there that day. However, except for the abundant spiritual energy here, I didn't find anything special. In my opinion, since it was a forbidden area, there should be a barrier or guards around it. But this place didn't look mysterious at all. Officer Wang, who was next to me, seemed to see my doubts. He explained to me, "There are only a few people in the Wanwu cave, but there are many things to do. Usually, no one will come here. Moreover, there is a formation outside. Without my permission, no one can enter. It's unnecessary to send guards here." Officer Wang's words were reasonable, but I still didn't see anything special about this place. I didn't know where the forbidden area was. Thinking of this, he was really curious, so he urged Wang Can to open the forbidden area immediately without further delay. After Officer Wang got the order, he didn't dare to delay. He flew to the waterfall in the mountain stream, made a hand seal, and mumbled something. A few seconds later, the waterfall was separated like a curtain, revealing a deep cave. The moment the cave appeared, I sensed an abundant amount of spiritual chi coming from inside. Could it be that this spiritual chi was emitted by the divine tool inside? However, I immediately denied this idea. As far as I knew, among the 10 divine weapons, only the Kunlun mirror had rich spiritual energy. It was created by the Kunlun goddess, and it hadn't experienced the primal chaos yet. The other 9 divine weapons had more or less primal chaos aura around them. In that case, the spiritual energy wasn't from the divine weapon. Perhaps there was a special formation inside. While I was pondering, Nangong had already walked into the cave. I didn't think too much and followed the 2 of them into the cave. As soon as I stood still, the cave suddenly became bright, and I could see the structure of the cave. Except for being a little spacious, it was no different from an ordinary cave. However, the spiritual energy in the cave was abundant, which made people feel comfortable. Moreover, there was a waterfall outside all year round, while there was no water at the entrance of the cave, which was strange. The cave seemed to be long and narrow, and the spiritual energy in front of us was even more abundant. After walking for 15 minutes, we stopped. However, I didn't see the divine weapon that Nangong had mentioned. Instead, there were several beams of light. There was a big gap between the beams, which allowed people to pass through easily. As I had guessed, the spiritual energy in the cave came from these beams. I didn't think that they were that simple. Since they were placed here, they must be used to stop people from entering the cave. Moreover, the spiritual energy in these beams wasn't inferior to any kind of energy. I guessed that even though I was a young god celestial master, I would be seriously injured if I tried to break through. Chapter 860. People with Yang Spirit Ascension were the strongest forces in the world. After Xiaju ascended, he would become an immortal, so he couldn't be compared with mortals. In the entire human world, only President Li, Celestial Master Zhang, the Lord of Penglai, the evil sacrificial spirit, and the Serpent King of the Lu clan had reached the Ascension realm. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that this secret formation was the strongest defense in the world. While I was thinking, Officer Wang stepped forward and took out a crescent-shaped jade ring. He spread his hands, and the jade ring soared into the air, flying toward the light beams. However, the jade ring didn't fly into the light beams as I had expected. Instead, it moved quickly in the air. A few seconds later, a strong suction force appeared in front of us. The light beams were sucked into the jade ring by this suction force. Now, the mysterious formation was completely opened, and there were no more spiritual energy fluctuations in the cave. After Officer Wang retrieved the jade ring, he turned around and signaled to us that we could move forward. We didn't linger here and followed Officer Wang. A moment later, a wisp of primal chaos aura appeared in front of us, but it was very weak. If my spiritual sense hadn't been so strong, I wouldn't have been able to detect it. Nangong's cultivation base was higher than mine, so he naturally sensed the aura. However, he looked pensive, and I didn't know what he was thinking about. At this moment, Officer Wang suddenly stopped and told us that we had arrived. Nangong and I came to our senses and stood side by side with Officer Wang. Although I knew that there was a divine weapon in the cave, I couldn't help but sigh when I took a closer look. There was an altar in front of us, and a weapon that looked like an axe was hovering in the air. The axe was shrouded in thick witchcraft energy. Seeing this scene, I understood why the primal chaos aura I had sensed earlier was so weak. Someone had deliberately isolated it. However, the primal chaos aura on this divine weapon was so strong that it was impossible to completely cover it. I clearly remembered that among the 10 great divine weapons, the one with the strongest primal chaos aura was the Pangu axe. Legend had it that at the beginning of the world's chaos, Pangu woke up from his sleep and saw that the world was dark. He took a huge axe and split the sky and the earth. That was how the world, the moon, and the starry sky came into being. This axe had the power to split the sky and the earth, and it could travel through the void. Its power wasn't weaker than the Xianyuan sword. The weapon in front of him was also in the shape of an axe. In that case, it was undoubtedly the Pengu axe. Nangong knew about it, but he didn't change his expression. He motioned Wang Can to come forward and take it out. Officer Wang didn't take action immediately. Instead, he observed the Pengu axe. After a while, he looked surprised and turned to look at us. Is this one of the 10 great divine weapons? Pengu axe? Judging from his shocked expression, it was obvious that he did not know that the Pengu axe was in the cave. However, based on what had happened between Nangong and Wang Can's father knew about it, which was why he asked Nangong to come and take it out after hundreds of years. It was not surprising that Wang Can's father did not tell him this news. After all, Wang Can was still young. In the face of this Pengu axe, any normal person would have the impulse to take it as their own. Moreover, even if Wang Can did not have this idea, it would lead to countless changes just by revealing the news. Therefore, Wang Can's father must have considered this and made the decision. After getting Nangong Yinjing, the shock on Officer Wang's face disappeared. It was replaced by surprise. He turned around and walked toward the Pengu axe. When he was close to it, he raised his hands, and a flow of thick-witch energy appeared in his palms. Then, he grabbed the Pengu axe. Nangong didn't stop him. I thought that he had tacitly allowed Officer Wang to take it out. However, as soon as Officer Wang touched the Pengu axe shook and sent Officer Wang flying. The witch energy in his hands couldn't stop it at all. Seeing this, I was also shocked. Although I had anticipated the power of the divine weapon, Officer Wang's cultivation base was extraordinary. Even though he was prepared, he still couldn't fight back. It was beyond my expectation. I was puzzled, and Officer Wang, who was lying on the ground, didn't know what was going on. After a while, we turned to look at Nangong. We wanted to get an answer from him. Nangong didn't pay attention to our eyes. He took a few steps forward and stood in front of the Pengu axe. He frowned as if he was thinking about something. It was obvious that he didn't understand why the Pengu axe had such a strong self-defense ability. After a while, Nangong's frown eased a little. He turned around and asked Officer Wang, "Did your father tell you anything before he left?" Officer Wang was stunned when he heard his question. He tilted his head and pondered. After 10 seconds, he remembered something and said with uncertainty, "When my father left, he entrusted me with all the affairs of the Wangu cave and left me a jade ring. At that time, I asked him what the jade ring was, but my father didn't tell me anything. He just told me that it would be useful in the future, so I should keep it. Apart from that, my father didn't tell me anything else." The jade ring he mentioned was obviously the one that had been used to open the mysterious formation. When he was in the mysterious formation, he subconsciously took out the jade ring. Apparently, his father had told him about the connection between the jade ring and the formation. Since his father didn't tell me anything else, it was possible that the jade ring had something to do with the witch energy outside the divine weapon. While I was thinking about it, Nangong also had the same thought. Before I could say anything, he asked Officer Wang to take out the jade ring to test it. Officer Wang didn't refuse. He nodded and took out the jade ring again. When we were outside the formation, the jade ring could absorb the spirit energy from the light column. Obviously, it wasn't an ordinary item. I looked at it a few more times, but I didn't see anything special about it. While I was thinking, the jade ring left Officer Wang's hand and flew forward. Soon, it hit the witch energy wrapped around the Chiyu axe. However, what happened next was completely different from what I had expected. When the jade ring came into contact with the shaman chi, it suddenly exploded. However, the shaman chi did not dissipate. Instead, it gradually gathered into a shadow. No one had expected that the jade ring would explode. They were all shocked, but when they saw the phantom, Nangong and Officer Wang's expressions eased. Especially Officer Wang. When the phantom appeared, he immediately knelt and shouted, "Father!" When I saw him, I was startled. That phantom was Officer Wang's father. Didn't he ascend to the heavens and become an immortal? Why is he here? As soon as I had this thought, I understood. Of course, this phantom wasn't a real person. It should be a wisp of spiritual power left by Officer Wang. It was similar to the phantom of Shunnong that the Shunnong cauldron had summoned. Of course, even if it was just an illusion, Officer Wang had left it on purpose. Since it had appeared here, it was clear that he had something to tell him. As I had expected, Officer Wang's father didn't pay attention to Officer Wang's actions. Instead, he said in an ethereal voice, "Ken since you've opened the forbidden area, I presume Nangong has come to our Wangu Grotto heaven. Before you take the Pangu axe, I have something to tell you." Wang Kan's father looked very kind, and his voice was very soft. After he finished speaking, he paused for a moment, then continued, "The appearance of the Pangu axe means that the mountain and sea realm is no longer a secret location. Nangong is an elder of the Magi tribe. From now on, you must follow his instructions. Don't let your emotions affect your decisions. After the mountain and sea realm opens, there will be a bitter battle. When the time comes, you must do your best to protect the Magi tribe. The 9 cauldron clans will be led by Wangu Grotto Heaven. You must gather the strength of the entire clan. First, you must welcome the people of the mountain and sea realm, and second, you must deal with the remaining demon tribe members. You must remember this." At this point, the illusory figure suddenly disappeared. What followed was a wave of majestic, chaotic energy. When Officer Wang heard this, he didn't know what to think. Clearly, his father had given him an order. The matter of the mountain and sea realm couldn't be avoided in Wangu Grotto Heaven. After a moment, Officer Wang rose to his feet and walked toward the Pangu axe. As for me, I looked at Nangong. Although I knew that when the mountain and sea realm opened, there would be a catastrophe in the mortal world, I didn't know what to do. But after hearing Officer Wang's father mention it again, I had mixed feelings. Officer Wang's father didn't sound like a problem, but the truth was that Wangu Grotto Heaven had already declined, and the 9 cauldron clans only had a few survivors. As for the Magi tribe, the only survivors were those from the Valley of the Medicine Kings. Whether it was to welcome the remaining people of the mountain and sea realm, or to defend against the demon tribe, they were stretched thin. If there were a lot of Magi left in the mountain and sea realm, it would be easier to deal with them. But when Demon Emperor June led the Magi to invade the mountain and sea realm, not even Shunnong could protect himself. How could the other Magi survive under the oppression of the demon tribe? I even wondered if there were still Magi left in the mountain and sea realm. As he pondered these questions, Officer Wang took the Pangu axe and handed it to Nangong. He bowed and said, "Officer Wang will obey your orders, Elder." Clearly, Officer Wang had heeded his father's instructions, and had immediately expressed his stance to Nangong. Nangong smiled and helped him to his feet. Then he shook his head and said, "Wanwu Grotto Heaven will take care of the Pangu axe. When the mountain and sea realm opens, you will know what to do." Officer Wang didn't stand on ceremony. He put the Pangu axe away, then used his shaman chi to wrap it up to block out the primal chaos aura. He clearly understood the importance of a divine item. Right now, he was in Wanwu Grotto Heaven, so it was fine. However, if he were outside, the primal chaos aura would spread, and he feared that it would attract a lot of trouble. It was best to be careful. After everything was done, we didn't stay for long. We flew out of the cave and headed back to the palace we had come from. When we returned, Nangong told Officer Wang that the 10 great divine items had been used, and that it wouldn't be long before the mountain and sea realm opened. He told him to take care of the affairs in Wanwu Grotto Heaven, and then to go somewhere with him. After Officer Wang left, Officer Wang didn't have any more doubts. After listening to Nangong, he nodded and left to take care of the affairs in Wangu Grotto Heaven. After Officer Wang left, only Nangong and I were left in the palace. Nangong didn't look as worried as he had before. He looked much more relaxed. He had been plotting for many years, all for the purpose of opening the mountain and sea realm and welcoming the revival of the Magi. Now that the time was near and his long-cherished wish was about to be fulfilled, he was naturally delighted. I, on the other hand, wasn't as relaxed as he was. I was still worried about the problem I had been thinking about, and was hesitating about whether or not I should discuss it with Nangong. Chapter 861. I thought about it for a long time before voicing my suspicions. When Nangong heard it, he looked at me with a mocking expression. After a long moment, he said, "How can you be so sure that there are still demon folk in the mountain and sea realm?" I stared blankly for a moment, then shook my head. The demon folk invaded the mountain and sea realm in large numbers. I can't say for sure, but it's definitely possible. Nangong pursed his lips and smiled. Back then, the demon folk were trapped in the mountain and sea realm, and their numbers weren't small. But so were the Magi. The Magi are the elites of the human race. Other than the demon emperor, who else could stand up to them? Even without the leadership of the Flame Emperor, they would have slaughtered the demon folk in the mountain and sea realm. Thousands of years have passed, and the Magi in the mountain and sea realm have long since flourished. How could there possibly be any demon folk left? Even if there were, they would be struggling at death's door. Listening to his words, my eyebrows furrowed even deeper. It was true that the Magi were in the mountain and sea realm, and that they outnumbered the demon folk. But exterminating them was easier said than done. Back then, outside the mountain and sea realm, the demon folk hadn't been exterminated by the combined forces of the human race and the Magi. How could they possibly exterminate the demon folk within the mountain and sea realm? As for what Nangong had said, that was just his speculation. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that this was his ideal situation. As for what would actually happen, I had no way of knowing. I was silent for a moment, then sighed and continued. Do you know that what you're doing is no different from gambling? We have no way of knowing what is going on in the mountain and sea realm. I can't deny what you're saying. But have you ever considered that the demon folk aren't as weak as they seem? If a large number of them show up, how will you defend against them? The situation in the mortal world is far more complicated than it was in ancient times. When the time comes, rivers of blood will flow. You only care about the legacy of the Magi, but have you ever considered the lives of the people in the world? My words were a bit harsh, but Nangong's expression didn't change. He shook his head and said, "It's not that I haven't considered what you're saying. I'll handle it myself. There's no need for you to worry. Since the mountain and sea realm is the goal of the entire human race, casualties are inevitable. However, to the legacy of the shaman tribe, such a price is insignificant." His words made me angry. I respected his dream of reviving the shaman race, but I could not agree with his attitude that he would rather die than let himself die. His so-called insignificant price could, in fact, be an earth-shattering matter. For him to be able to say such things so casually, it goes without saying that he was just trying to convince me to open the mountain and sea realm. Having reached this point in my train of thought, I gritted my teeth and told him that I would not agree to open the mountain and sea realm without a foolproof plan. Hearing this, Nangong's expression immediately darkened. After staring at me for a while, he suddenly lifted his leg and walked towards me. I had never seen him like this before. Now that I had made this decision, I was quite nervous. After all, this meant that I would have to become the enemy of all the cultivators in the world. How could I resist them all by myself? I thought that my words had angered him, But unexpectedly, just as he was about to reach me, he suddenly stopped. His expression returned to normal, and he said coolly, "When I was discussing with Wang Can's father, we also considered this matter. According to our speculations, as long as we gather the 9 cauldron clans, we will be able to find a way to reseal the demon race." His words reminded me of what Wang Can's father had said in the cave. He had indeed mentioned that Wang Can would go with Nangong to gather the 9 cauldron clans. From what I could see, he wasn't just trying to brush me off. If that was the case, why didn't he tell me earlier? Why did he argue with me for so long? Having reached this point in my train of thought, I voiced my doubt. I wanted to hear Nangong's explanation. After listening to me, he told me that the 9 cauldron clans weren't just related to the sealing of the demon race, but that he had also discovered some things that had happened in the past. Nangong's words made me recall what Uncle Lin had said to me in the Medicine King's Valley. At that time, I thought that he had found the origin of the ancient war. Could it be that Nangong had the same thoughts as well? Just as I was about to ask him about it, Nangong waved his hand, indicating that I shouldn't pursue the matter any further. It was still too early to think about it. Moreover, he had only discovered some vague things, so he couldn't determine whether it was true or not. His words confirmed my suspicions. Since he had said so, I didn't dwell on it any further. It seemed that he had a way to deal with it, and I didn't need to risk the world to stop the opening of the mountain and sea realm. Nangong would take care of the rest. I couldn't help but admire him for his steadiness. I had been too impatient before. However, since he had mentioned that the 9 cauldron clans would have a way to deal with it, he would need the help of the 9 cauldrons. With that in mind, I took out the 9 cauldrons from my Xiang Lu pouch and handed them to Nangong. They had been lying around for many years, but now it was time to put them to good use. When he saw my action, he was surprised at first, but he immediately reacted and put the 9 cauldrons away. Then, he told me that I didn't have much time left, and that I should hurry up and cultivate. That was natural. At the moment, the Xian, Taoist, and Buddhist sects were searching for me in the outside world, and I had nowhere to go. Moreover, the mountain and sea realm would open soon, so staying in Wanwu Paradise to cultivate was the only way. While we were talking, Wang Can returned. However, he didn't seem to want to take the Pangu axe with him, which was a safe move. He walked forward and cupped his hands to me, then bowed to Nangong. "Wang Can has handed over the clan's affairs to you. We can set out now." Nangong nodded slightly, then stood up and said goodbye to me, then prepared to leave. However, I suddenly thought of something and wanted to ask Nangong about the specific date of the opening of the mountain and sea realm. When he heard my question, he stopped and turned around. "In 1 month, the Magi will gather in Medicine King's Valley." What he meant was that I should meet them in Medicine King's Valley in 1 month. In that case, the opening of the mountain and sea realm would be within 1 or 2 months. From the looks of it, I was pressed for time. However, when Nangong mentioned Medicine King's Valley, I thought of something else. Back when I was cultivating the transformation of Taoist Qi, I sensed fluctuations of Taoist Qi in the cave of Medicine King's Valley. Later, I realized that Nangong had deliberately brought someone there. However, I couldn't figure out why he would choose to join hands with someone who cultivated Taoist Qi. With that thought in mind, I blurted out my question before Nangong left. After listening to my question, he seemed a little surprised. It seemed he hadn't expected that I would notice it. However, since things had come to this, he didn't hide it. He only said 2 words, "Mount Lao." Mount Lao? What does this have to do with Mount Lao? After thinking about it carefully, I realized that when I returned the Eastern Emperor Bell to Mount Lao, the sect master of Mount Lao had met with misfortune. At that time, I sensed Nangong's aura. After some analysis, I guessed that Nangong had reached some kind of agreement with the sect master of Mount Lao. Otherwise, why would the sect master of Mount Lao be willing to die? Now that Nangong mentioned it again, I guessed that the person Nangong had brought to the cave was the sect master of Mount Lao. However, what made me curious was that the evil spirit and I had clearly found Nangong's aura in the sect leader's ashes. This meant that the Lao Mountain sect leader's body had been destroyed. Could it be that he had found a new body? After thinking about it, it wasn't impossible. Since Nangong had reached some kind of agreement with him, he wouldn't die easily. It seemed Nangong still had some hidden cards. While I was thinking, Nangong had left with Wang Can. I was the only one left in the hall. If I wanted to know more, I would have to wait until the next time we met. It was boring to stay in this place. I thought I shouldn't delay any longer, so I decided to go to Officer Wang's father's mansion to cultivate. A moment later, I arrived. As soon as I stood still, I sensed Mi Tai's aura. His innate talent wasn't bad, and his cultivation base was close to the middle stage of the seal realm. At this moment, there were all kinds of rations placed at the entrance of the palace. Apparently, Wang Can had prepared them for Mi Tai. After a quick glance, I didn't mind it and directly walked into the palace. The palace was spacious and didn't have any decorations. I guessed Mi Tai was afraid that the airflow he created during his cultivation would damage the furnishings in the room. That was why he had asked people to move the items out of the palace. It seemed Mi Tai didn't abuse my identity to bully people here. I was satisfied with that. With that thought in mind, I walked around the main hall and went to the room in the back. As soon as I entered the room, I saw a barrier of magic energy in front of me. I didn't break the barrier and walk in. I just stood there and called Mi Tai's name. After calling me a few times, the barrier in front of me disappeared. Mi Tai walked out of the room. When he saw me, he looked happy. He hurried to me and kowtowed to me. "Master." I was glad to see his cultivation base. I asked him to get up and talk to me. After he got my order, he invited me into the room to talk to me. During our conversation, I learned that after he had reached the late stage of the glorious era, he found that he lacked a cultivation technique for fighting. He wanted to ask Wang Can for a cultivation technique, but he didn't know how to ask him. Just as he was feeling uncertain, he met a child named Imo. He was the same as Mi Tai. He was alone in this place, and after a while, the two of them became friends despite their age difference. Later, when Imo learned that Mi Tai was my disciple, they became even closer. During one of their conversations, Mi Tai had unintentionally mentioned cultivation techniques, and Imo had actually indicated that she could teach Mi Tai some sword technique. The two of them had become one, so Mi Tai didn't refuse. After learning the sword techniques that Imo had taught him, Mi Tai's cultivation base advanced by leaps and bounds. Within a few months, he had become a Seal Heavenly Master. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.